right, so we'll call the meeting to order again, 6:03, March 18th. This meeting will be conducted via remote video and teleconference pursuant to 1 MRSA, excuse me, subsection 403-A. Members of the public may join the meeting by phone by dialing 1-929-205-6099 and using meeting ID 817-257-119, password 280819, or via computer at the link provided. Members of the public may also submit comments by using the form on the city's website under email, city departments/city council. And just so we'll get this up front in case I overlook it in the heat of the moment, we do have an email sent to all the budget committee members. I'm not sure who else was CC'd on this, but from Lance Honig. It's quite lengthy, but we will certainly take that as input from the public at the appropriate time. So email is working for you to email in your comments, and I'll take a quick look when we get to that situation. So next on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. And if everyone would mute their mics, I will lead the Pledge of Allegiance. Here we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we will have a brief moment of silence, please. Okay, thank you very much for that. And next is roll call. Open up my roll call list so I don't forget anybody. Councilor Hanselman.
Present. Sorry.
There we go. Okay. Councilor Hurley.
Present.
Becky Brink.
Present.
Jason Rice.
Present.
Jace Clark.
Present.
Wesley Davey.
Present.
And I am present also. And so we have a full house here this evening.
Well, Councilor Tuttle, I probably was talking to my wife when you called my name, Bob.
Well, we're not doing that's just roll call for budget committee members.
I'll keep quiet then, Bob.
Well, you'll have plenty of opportunity to speak as time goes on here. We're on to item 5, which is adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments to the agenda that need to be taken this evening? Okay, hearing no adjustments to the agenda. We'll move on to item 6, which is approval of the minutes for Thursday, March 11th, 2020. Can I have a motion on that?
So moved.
We need a second.
Second.
All right, thank you. It's been moved in second to approve the meetings, the minutes to the meeting. Is there any discussion on the minutes?
Did I get who made the first and the second? I'm sorry. Ann Hanselman, and yes. The second?
Jace.
Jace, thank you, Jace.
Okay, no discussion? Just ask one more time. No discussion? Okay, so we have to have a roll call vote on the budget. So Councilor Hanselman?
Yes.
Councilor Hurley?
Yes.
Becky Brink?
Yes.
Jason Clark? Excuse me, Jason Rice?
Yes.
Bifocal issue here. Jace Clark?
Yes.
Wesley Davey?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes, so that is a unanimous vote on the minutes. So now we're on to item 7, and that's a public hearing. And so we're going to have the way I think we should proceed, and this is open for feedback on anyone. As I believe that we're going to hear a budget summary from the city manager that would include both the schools and the municipal piece. Is that correct, Steve?
That's correct. We're going to use the tax rate calculation sheet and just show the year-over-year changes as the detail of both the municipal and the school budgets have been presented prior to. So we'll use that as a summary before we take public comment at that point.
Right. Yeah. So once that's complete, we'll move into public comment. At which point I'll take comments from the public first. And at this point, I don't have a feel for how many members of the public there are out there this evening. I'm not going to put any time limits on comments or numbers of questions. However, I'm going to reserve the right to do that only because I would like to make sure we get done before 10 o'clock tonight. Hopefully well before that. But I certainly would like to, the point is to hear comments from everybody, and we'll all do the best we can to get that done. So after that, then we'll open it up to questions, comments, and responses, I guess, if you will, from school committee, city councilors, and budget committee members. Although remember, budget committee members, that you kind of have the last word on this anyways. And then after that, we will have a discussion among budget committee members, as I mentioned last week, where I asked you to get your calculators and pencils out, and at which point we'll try to narrow things down a little bit. And based on that discussion, we may want to see some budget scenarios in which if you are a budget committee member who would like to see the budget lowered, we can have that discussion. There's also the opportunity to put things in to the budget, which would potentially raise the budget. We can have a mixture of both, some things going out, some things being put in. And that will give us some direction to give to both the city manager and the superintendent of schools to work with those so that we can see what the impact is, the real impact in terms of personnel and services, et cetera, to those reductions. Then the plan would be to come back next week. We do have some other future agenda items at the bottom of this agenda, but our task for next week would be to, after discussion, then determine a bottom dollar, if you will, dollar amount, essentially for the entire city budget, including the schools, and that would be our motion, and that essentially is reflective of the mill rate, that dollar amount. And of course, then that goes on to the city council for final approval. Am I in the ballpark here, city manager, with the way I'm laying things out?
You are.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll, the end is in sight here. For those of you that are tiring of being on the budget committee, the end is in sight. So with that, again, we'll begin item 7, the public hearings, with a summary of the budget so far from the city manager, and this does include the education piece of the budget. So with that, you're on, Steve.
Okay, so do you see a blue slide now? It says public hearing and follow up?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So this evening, pursuant to Section 611 of the City Charter, public hearings on municipal and school budget. Within 14 days after receiving the municipal and school budgets from the city manager and the superintendent of schools, City Council, School Committee, and Budget Committee shall hold a joint public hearing on the proposed budgets, at which time the Budget Committee chair shall preside. So that's the process that we're starting out with this evening. In here, I'm going to expand this, I think, until resolution breaks down a little bit. The Budget Committee had asked for, rather than going back through all of the details on both the municipal and school budgets, because those have been presented extensively, we wanted to go back to, I'm sorry, I got a frog in my throat. Wanted to go back to the tax rate calculation sheet and looking at the year-over-year change. And we'll look at the various categories, and then the public will open it up and the public can ask questions on each of the ensuing budgets. Municipal valuation last year was $1,621,521,000. Currently, in the projections that we're using, we're using a very conservative number of $80 million added value in there. And at the time that we added that in, you can see that's an $80 million increase year over year, an increase of 4.93%, which is higher than what we had originally estimated as far as sustainability calculations are concerned. I'm going to pause on this number here for this evening. I would suggest when we get into the Budget Committee's work tonight under old business or other action items, I did obtain information from our assessing department today that I'd like to talk to you about as far as this particular number. For the public hearing, we've been using the conservative number of $80 million of increased valuation year over year, or 4.93% increase. Looking at the county tax, this is we put that number in, $799,526. That's the municipality's portion of the overall York County county budget, and that's our proportional share of the county budget. It's the percentage of our valuation as in comparison to the overall valuation of York County as a whole. You can see there's a 0% increase there. The reason we are comfortable with doing that is that year over year, because of our aggressive utilization of tax increment financing, and knowing that the typical valuation year over year of the coastal communities that comprise the largest portion of value in our communities rises faster than what ours does. Typically, we can carry a fairly steady number there, so it's plugged in at this small amount. I was at the county government office just last night, and the county manager is just starting to talk with the county commissioners about the budget that has to be in place by May 1st. And he indicated there's a 0.28% anticipated increase in the net taxation on that budget. So this is a very comfortable number for us at this point in time. Looking at the municipal services, year over year, the expense budget increased by $956,000, so it's up to $27,218,635, a 3.64% year over year change. We had gone over all of the categories that comprise that. It's basically locked up in increased cost for personnel, some level of changes in the contract services, and for this portion of the budget. Libraries are requesting the same dollar amount as they requested last year at $561,975. We had questions raised about that as far as other funding that the federal government might have passed to them. We haven't completely gone into that detail or answered that question, but they did request the same number as last year, so we carried that number forward. Outside agencies, you can see, is funded at the same at $96,237. At the last time the Budget Committee took up the municipal budget, there is a small allowance there that can come off in that number because one of the agencies dropped their request as not being needed for this year. Debt service is the largest change on the municipal piece here. It went from $1,187,733 last year, a 56.5% increase. It is up by $671,000. $706,000 of that change is just in the new level of debt service that was voted in by referendum vote in November of 2019 that provided for the ramp up on the paving programs here in the city of Sanford. So the municipal budget has an increase of $29,735,639 is the request. It is up by 5.79% or $1,627,522. Oops, I'm sorry. Matt, or did you want to just give you the same quick synopsis as far as the education's numbers are concerned?
Yeah, it's right there in terms of, if you look at our education, that's up 2.31%. Our debt service actually going down. We still have our elementary project through that, but the overall is going down by 2.57%. Adult education is up 2.36%. Then for us, that gets to 56,281,449, which is a 1.3% increase.
Thank you. Moving on to the capital reserve. On the municipal request, it was $3.2 million last year. This year's request is $3.9 million. It's up by $654,000 or 20.02%. The large portion of that increase, over $350,000 of that increase, is tied up wholly in the increased road effort as well. Pursuant to the 2019 analysis and voted referendum piece, Council had committed to ramping up the CIP by $500,000 each year on the roadways. So this year we'll take it to from the $1.5 million prior to $2 million. So the largest portion of that is capitalized in that number. School, you can see, is at $333,975, a 3.71%, or an $11,950 increase. I don't know if Matt, if you had any other comment on that. Okay. So overall, the capital request this year is at $4,256,643. It's up 18.55%, an increase of $666,181. That brings us to the bottom line appropriation for county, municipal, school, and capital reserve program to be $91,073,257, an increase of 3.43%, or an increase of $3,016,502 year over year. Moving on to the revenue portion of the sheet. On the municipal side, we always have to, pursuant to state requirements, we set the state municipal revenue sharing. The first line is set off separately. That's set off separately on your tax bill as well, so that you can see that portion of broad-based taxation that's distributed back by the by the state to the municipality, what the municipal tax offset is. Last year we had that at $2,812,396. That was based upon the 3.75% distribution from the state. Again, this is supposed to be 5%. It was for decades upon decades, over 4 decades, until recent history, where they decreased that in order to offset difficult financial times at the state level. The number that you see here reflected in the current budget is at $3,069,052, an increase of $256,656, or 9.13%. Current state budget activity carries that again at 3.75%. The increase comes from increased projected revenues for the state. So prior distribution was at $128 million going into that pool of funds. It's now projected to be $141 million, thus the change, the positive change there. Anne Marie might know far better than I, but there still is a lot of conversation going on at the state to further ramp that up this year, and the state got improved numbers yet again today as far as projections are concerned. So even if they do not change that percentage, we may be able to give you stronger numbers than what I have here this evening. So please flag that number as a future potential increase in revenue and offsetting our bottom line. All of the municipal revenues together, which comes from licensing, permitting, and a whole host of other fees, solid waste transfer fees, and the like, has an amount of $11,199,644, an increase of 6.53%. Finding the two revenues on the municipal side are at $14,268,696, an increase of 7.08%. Year-over-year increase of $942,884. Matt, I'll let you speak on the school revenues.
School revenues, we saw a small increase in our school EPS. That was up 0.33% at $94,554. Our debt share is taken hold with is up 0.43% at $45,693. Our miscellaneous revenue is down with that, down to $30,000. Our adult education subsidy was up slightly at $1,386. Our adult education revenue was up $57,000. That's with our share agreement with MSAD 60. We also are expecting to get more incoming ninth graders as we are for 12th graders who will be graduating. And then the nothing in the school unassigned fund balance. We did have a carryover of $20,000 where we did purchase some items, one-time items in the athletics this year. And so that gives us a total school revenue up 0.59% of $236,801.
Bringing the combined municipal and school revenues together is calling out currently at $54,868,149. That's a 2.2% increase, or $1,179,685 year over year. Looking at the amount of to be raised from taxation, if you take the expense on the prior sheet minus the $54 million in revenue, you come up with a net taxation before other adjustments of $36,205,108, or 5.34%. So that is a call out of additional taxation this year over last year of $1,836,817. Use of undesignated fund balances. This comes from the municipal side of the undesignated fund balance. Last year, the committee recommended and the council approved the use of $850,000 of undesignated fund balance. You can see that offset 52 cents on the dollar, on the tax dollar, from net taxation. Calling out the same amount this year, that stems from an analysis looking at the long-term trending of our undesignated fund balance, and it has been deemed that the $850,000 is a sustainable amount that can be utilized to offset net taxation without having a negative impact, otherwise stable fund balance. Because of the increased valuation, you can see it's offsetting 50 cents on the dollar as opposed to the 52 cents this year, but year over year, the same utilization. So when you take that additional revenue in, we're calling for net taxation to be raised of $35,355,108, an increase of 5.48%, or $1,836,817. So looking at the bottom line as it's currently sitting right now, using $80 million worth of new valuation added in here, and a net to be raised of $35.3 million, holding the homestead exemption dollar amount to be raised the same as last year. That because we know that right now, the minimum we should see is $25,000 on the homestead exemption with a reimbursement rate of 72%, the same as last year. The BETI, the Business Equipment Tax Exemption Program, is assumed to produce at least the same revenue as last year, or $601,575. This represents the personal property tax of your manufacturing base that qualifies in there, whereby our assessor puts the full value of that amount of personal property. He assesses that, reports it to the state, and then the businesses do not pay any tax on that personal property. The state reimburses the taxable value times our mill rate at 1/2. So 50% of that amount is then paid back to the municipality. That's anticipated to reduce your net taxation by 37 cents per thousand. The overlay last year was set at $261,240. That's a very low amount. It truly represents the rounding number in there. That amount of money can be further assigned by the city council at some later point in time. If there's an emergency situation or some other voted change, this amount can be utilized accordingly. A municipality pursuant to state law can raise up to 5% of their total budget can be raised over and above the amount needed. So you could actually raise 5% of that 35 million down on this number. Community has never chose to do that type of an aggressive raise. And then the final number is tax increment financing. So the city has 7 tax increment financing districts comprised across the various areas within the community. That produces $900,994. That's all sheltered revenue. So as long as the municipality utilizes those for what's called state qualified cost, which we use 100% of that on state qualified cost, you get that offset from net taxation. We use those to address, as you have seen in the municipal side of the budget, we use those to offset elements within our balance sheet that would have been paid out of the general taxation. We're now being able to pay out of those tax increment financing district and getting the full benefit of those dollars as opposed to a 50% offset. We allowed that to come into general taxation. It would further reduce the EPS funding. It would increase our county tax and also decrease our state municipal revenue sharing. So as the budgets have been presented for both the municipal and the school side of the equation, bringing those together with the net taxation and the anticipated new valuation, we see a mill rate that's calculated at 20.27, an increase of 11 cents per $1,000 of valuation over last year's mill rate of 20.16. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, City Manager and Superintendent, for the overview. I'm going to use the bully pulpit here for a minute and harken back to the old days, specifically to Matt. As far as carryovers go in the school budget, what used to happen, and I don't know why it's not happening now in terms of carryovers, is of course you always have a carryover when you go through the audit process, or generally you do. And in applying that to the budget, we always waited, school committee, we always waited until the following year. In other words, the budget surplus went through the audit process and was identified as funds, real funds, not an estimate or anything like that. And so now we seem to be on a different track here. I don't know why. Again, this was 15 years ago or more when I was involved with school budgets. And I listened to your discussion that you had some projected carryover for this year's budget, and that amount was not the amount that you thought it was going to be because things happen between now and the end of June. So I guess I'm asking the question because you have zero in carryover this year, and I know that's another discussion that the budget committee wanted to have, look at if there was some carryover available. But because there's zero there, is this a good year to go back to the old system where you wait and identify the carryover for the next budget and therefore reduce next year's school budget? Or are we doing a good thing right now? Is this the way it should be done?
A good question, Chair. I think it's probably a combination of things. We Since I've been in Sanford, initially we did use carryover as revenue, and that was obviously very helpful. Coming into last year's budget, we did not meet our carryover number.
Right.
And so when we had our audit, we immediately put in a budget freeze. And then last spring, we also had COVID-19 hit. So between those two things, we were able in this year's audit to have a carryover amount. But that's why we're not comfortable with putting any carryover in last year's budget. As far as putting any carryover in this year's budget, I would probably think that's something as a consideration, but at the same time, there is a lot of concern about us around COVID-19 and about going forward with that, and wanting to make sure that with some of those unknowns that we're able to live up to our commitments to be able to do that. So I think that's probably an overview, at least coming from our perspective at this time. I also know when we meet with our auditors and they look at where our carryover numbers fit in terms of what they expect and where it matches up with other school departments, by no means are we carrying over a large amount or too large. With that, we are probably somewhere between the low to middle in comparison based on our auditor's experience.
Okay.
We also worry about the increase in funding down the line here as also a concern for our EPS funding and our subsidy. We're obviously quite dependent on that, and so I think there's also some hesitation on that end as well, knowing that those could be going through some changes based on state revenues.
Right. But you understand my point here would be to have an auditable amount, an identified amount as carryover that could be applied, because so that it would take the guesswork out of the process. And I may be totally out of bounds. This may be your purview to decide if this is what you want to do, or the school committee to decide how they want to handle this. But it's just something that's occurred to me, and I just want to take a minute to speak to it. Okay. All right. So with that, we'll move on to the public part of this. What I would ask, only because there's quite a few people here tonight, I'm usually a lot more free and open with the meeting, but I want to make sure it stays manageable. If everyone, if you can, could mute your mics, I will say, except for the city manager, because he made some, well, you have difficulty putting your hand up, I guess, Steve. That's what it is. But if everyone else could mute, and members of the public, if you have a question or statement that you'd like to make, if you would raise your hand. I've got a bigger view on my screen now, so I think I can see just about everybody. But if you raise your hand, then you pop up to, if you know how this works, you pop up to like the front row here with a hand up, your electronic hand. And so I can see people who have raised their hand. If not, what I'm going to do periodically is I'm going to scroll through I'll let it be known, I'm going to scroll through and I'll look for audience members who have their hand up physically. Put your hand up, and then I'll call on you. So if there's members of the public, so this does not include school committee, budget committee, or city council members at this time. Members of the public, if you have questions or comments, please put your hand up. I do see Lance Honig has his hand up, so go ahead, Lance. You can kick things off.
Awesome, thank you. I'll be quick, 2 minutes, and won't be as long as my email. I've also been made aware that some of the numbers in the email may be in error, but I think the concept stands. So I'm Lance Honig, I'm a resident of Springvale. I don't believe I'm overstating it when I say that I believe that this year's budget is the most important one that we've had as long as I can remember, and that the decisions made on this year's budget will shape our future one way or the other. As presented, I have a hard time supporting it. To this point, the process has been smooth and fairly typical of a normal budget process. Municipal and school sides both have developed budgets, wrangled over line items, made some revisions, all in the hopes at the end, coming in line, striking the balance of what the community's needs are and what the taxpayer can possibly bear. In the end, both sides have been comfortable that the budgets presented will meet their needs for the 2021 and 2022 budget. However, what isn't being considered anywhere is the massive amount of gifted revenue that we are receiving as a result of the various stimulus packages from the federal government. $6 billion for the state of Maine, $1.6 billion for municipalities, $400 million for schools, all paid anywhere from 2 months from now and a year from now. Mr. Nelson has indicated that the schools are getting over $11 million, I believe, between the ESSER funds and the American Rescue Plan money. And I've seen numbers that suggest our city will be getting over 10 million, but I understand that City Manager Buck said on Tuesday that Sanford's only going to get 2 million. I don't know if that's the total over the entire term or just the first payment in 2 months. I don't know how I got the number so wrong from the spreadsheet. I saw 110 million for the 5 largest cities that Maine are receiving, and the chart that I saw showed Bedford getting more than 10 million. So I don't know if something changed there or if we're getting much less than them. Nevertheless, neither the city nor the schools have seen lost revenue due to the pandemic, and both sides' revenues are higher. The budgets have already been presented as sufficient to meet needs, including returning to full-time in-person learning. What that means to me is that we will have several $1 million coming into our community over the next 2 years that's either going to add to our spending line beyond what's already said to be needed and would be unsustainable, or we can use that money to fund expenses that are already budgeted for and pass the majority of the money through to the taxpayers. That tax reduction could then be used by residents to maintain their properties, support local businesses, or support their local charities, all of which are productive uses of money in response to the pandemic. Earlier today, I sent you all a lengthy email about this, speaking in general terms, also identifying specific things that I think could be considered. All told, I think it could add up to significant amounts, perhaps multiple $1 million per year for the next 3 years in reduction in taxation versus the current planned increase. Further, I think if spending is controlled, we would still have a reserve that could ease the transition to not having these funds in 3 years. Bottom line, after the cut in appropriation this year, the assumed percentage increase in our annual budget could be a permanently lower number. And then we would truly be talking about potential sustainability depending on how low that number can go. I recognize that I'm talking in round figures. My numbers may prove to be inaccurate. There may be reasons that I don't know why what I'm suggesting cannot be done. I know Mr. Buck indicated that in addition to my municipal number potentially being way off, there can't be a direct offset to taxation, but what about indirect? Can we not make a case that we are having to make significant cuts to our budget as a result of the pandemic and fiscal responsibility, elimination of programs and positions? We're at the end of our budget season, and the rescue money plan could then be used to reinstate those positions or programs that we had previously cut from the budget. I'm simply suggesting that the committee pursue this line of thinking as aggressively as possible when submitting the approved budget to council. Taxpayers have been more than patient with our operations budget, the school bonds, the road bond, the higher CIP expenses, and more. I believe that reducing our tax burden in a significant way would be the best use of funds for the long-term viability of our community. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Lance. There are some good points made there, but I think there are some clarifications that need to be made also. And let me just say quickly, I would say that the Budget Committee, although we've taken no action yet on the budget, is certainly have had conversations around many of the points that you're talking about in terms of the additional revenues coming in and how that might be used. So City Manager Buck would like to respond, so go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'd like to give Mr. Honing as much information as I know currently. Let me share a document. This was in my manager's report Tuesday night. So there's a lot of confusion. I was looking for the information. I went to both Senator Collins' office as well as to Senator King's office, and they gave me access to a series of sheets and information. At some point, I can either forward that to you, Lance, or I can put it out there in general. It was very helpful. Senator Collins' office gave me all of these links to the various sections of the legislation that was passed. So, pulling from that, and I'll show you the sheets where I got this here in just a moment. Maine, and these are all independent numbers, so this doesn't come out of the Maine number. These are all independent numbers. So Maine, as a state, is to receive $1.652 billion. That's for the state of Maine. York County, the county government, is supposed to receive $40.27 million. Stamford, as a municipality, is to receive $2.12 million. Lance, I believe you likely saw, so the 5 largest communities in our state that are entitlement communities under HUD, they split $150 million between those 5 communities. So yes, Biddeford is seeing somewhere upwards of between $10 and $11 million because they are an entitlement community. Stamford has yet to be named as one. We did a significant effort for this last census. We realigned several of our districts. We got approval of that. We got those district realignments approved. And we believed before COVID hit. There seems to be, they think there's going to be an undercount now, but we believed before COVID hit, by doing the realignment, the Stamford would have qualified, and hopefully we still will qualify as being an entitlement community, whereby we will get an allocation of money from HUD through CDBG each year that we do not have to compete for, but it will be allocated to us on an annual basis. And then in talking with Superintendent Nelson, we believe the multiplier that's being used will produce revenues of nearly $8 million on the school side. What is far less clear at this point in time is we have the initial stipulations that are listed out here. They're fairly extensive. One of the terminologies that was put forward to me from one of our congressional offices is that basically it's going to be very hard for you to utilize this fund to offset net taxation. As was discussed at the council meeting on Tuesday night, we believe that there's a number of creative ways that we can utilize this to produce offsets that can then be brought back into reducing net taxation. I just don't have a definitive number for that yet, but I believe well before taxes are committed, those determinations can be made, certain investments can be made, certain reimbursements, at least, and I'm only speaking on the municipal side at this point. There are certain expenditures that we've had to absorb over this past year of COVID for which we have been unable to file for reimbursements. And Lance, you listed a number of those out there, but let me just, off the top of my head, we had a number of PPE, all of the plexiglass units, the setbacks, the PPE, and everything else that we had to do. We have filed for that as a FEMA reimbursable expense, but we have yet to see any response as far as the revenue coming back on that. They then changed the rules partway through that process. Some of those elements, if we had done them at a latter point in time, luckily we did them early on, then became disallowable. Alex Hammerly, our EMA director, continues to file, continues to monitor that process. Even in a non-pandemic year, we typically don't see a FEMA reimbursement till at least the ensuing, the next fiscal year. And when that happens, it comes in as an unanticipated revenue. If we get that early enough that we know we can actually report it, then we can use that to offset net taxation. The city also incurred significant amount of expenditures under the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, whereby there was the amendments to the Family Medical Leave Act. It was extended out there as a federal benefit. We had to allow for various workers to be able to go home because of lack of childcare in schools. If they were COVID exposed, had to quarantine, if they're actually sick and such under that. The employers were able to are going to be able to file for income tax or tax filing reimbursement. The municipality cannot. We had to absorb all of that into this year's budget by delay of hiring individuals and a whole host of other mitigation pieces. We could pay ourselves back. It's my understanding we could pay ourselves back for that. Would then come as a revenue in the next fiscal year. We can utilize that to offset net taxation to the taxpayer. So there's a number of those elements that we'll look at diligently as we become more appraised of what the rules, all the strings are. I said to Ronnie today, it's going to take us a couple hours to cut all the strings on this check when it comes in, just to be able to deposit it. But it's going to be, that's going to be the trick to get the highest benefit back to the taxpayer, to reduce this year's bill as well as subsequent years, because we have until December 31st of 2024 to pay to utilize the entire distribution. So I very much appreciate your comments. I think there shall be a number of very creative ways to utilize this funds. I think the biggest examination is going to be what's the most beneficial.
And
Thank you,
from a school perspective, we had talked about this when the school committee, when we were doing our budget workshops this year, we were talking about being wary of the cliff. And what I mean by that is back the ARA funds, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, that put in $100 billion for education. And when that was turned around and used to balance budgets, it was also done in a way where those positions eventually, when those funds went away, were not funded. When we were putting our budget together, we did have the ESSER 2 funds. Looking at those, they were approximately $3 million. And we were looking at identifying those over the time period for learning loss, to try to come back and be able to help our students education recovery through summer programming, through the school year, for example. When we voted on this budget, we did not have the American Rescue Plan funds. Those have come in elsewise, and to me, the funding of that, looking at it for about $8 million, is the focus there is getting our kids back to school full time next year. And that's all of our students. So as we're starting to look at that, that's going to mean us expanding out with space, expanding out with staff, personnel, and those are going to be temporary costs. Those are not going to be, we're going to be very careful and strategic to not add those positions into our budget in things of carrying over and where it's going to come back and eventually cause that cliff for us. These are going to be funds intended for what they are. Looking at it, as I mentioned to Chairperson Stackpole's question about carryover, there are factors, and probably like Steve just talked about, yeah, there's ways that we can try to be able to look at that to try to offset. But I know, speaking for the school committee, trying to make sure that we've got a sustainable budget and one that we can be able to, year over year, not have to come into a situation where we get relief now, but it's going to be at a cost or a cliff coming down the road in future years. And so that's the balance we're trying to strike at this time.
If I could put one more document up here. This is the nationwide spreadsheet that was sent to me from Senator Collins' office. This keeps changing on me. So here's Maine. The Maine has a total distribution of $1.652 billion with a B, $billion that's coming to it as a state. We don't fall under the metro cities. That's your larger communities, and these are your entitlement communities. We fall under the other non-counties. So Sanford, City of, Maine, 2.12 million. Then for counties, I look under Maine, York County, 40.27 million. So the municipal managers are calling out to county government already, asking for how that's to be utilized, what that's going to do to our municipal tax bill. No different than local taxpayers should be asking the same thing about the distribution coming in. What's that going to do to their tax bill? So far we have no response back from the county, but I was at the county office on Wednesday night. They're in much the same place. Greg Zinzer, the county administrator, was reporting out to the commissioners. We're just getting these details now, starting to drill down on how it is that we are going to be allowed to utilize the money.
So, Steve, I just want to make a point. If when you listed those funds out, I know you did this the other night at the city council meeting, but I think what I caught this time, and I didn't think this way the other time, is that those numbers are all mutually exclusive, so to speak. In other words, there's still some of the possibly the 1.6252 billion that's coming into the state that may in fact trickle down to Sanford, may rush down instead of trickling down. So we may in fact receive more than the 2.12 million. Is that?
Well, I believe the trickle down aspect would be whatever favorable aspects they're able to utilize the funding for at the state level as allowed that will offset taxation. Or if I were governor for a day, I would be looking for how I can use this money to be able to then use my other balance sheet resources from collections to increase municipal revenue sharing, for example, from 3.75 to maybe 4.5, or back to the 5 this year, if it could be. Perhaps so they can utilize this for some of the COVID expenses within their Department of Health and Human Services and CDC and such like that, and be able to lessen the amount that they need to take from general funds. So that's how I would look for favorable impacts back here at the local level without a direct distribution from the state.
Right. Okay. Thanks for the clarification. I'm going to go back to Lance and ask if he has any questions on follow-up.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to ask questions. I wasn't expecting that. Steve, it's crazy to me that Biddeford is going to get 10 million and we're going to get 2. I can't remember what you called us. You tried to change things to make us something that would be what they currently are. And you thought that you did.
It's called being an entitlement community.
And you did that. Is that still possible that could happen? And is it still possible that our share of this could look more like theirs?
It won't happen timely enough to get us a larger share of this. That's already what was on the books as far as who got what.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, still in the end, we're talking about $10 or $11 million. And so for me, I can leave now, but my principle is the same. I think everybody understands where I was trying to go with it. So I'll be curious where it goes. Just as this hasn't been talked about. So as the budget was laid out, it was crazy for me to look at these numbers and then also look at a 3% appropriations increase.
So just going back to the spreadsheet quickly, here's the metro cities. These are the entitlement communities. So in Maine, you can see Auburn is getting 14.2 million. Bangor 21.14, Biddeford 11.7, Lewiston 22.82, and Portland 48.19.
Steve, when you
Yes.
use the word entitlement, I think people think it might be a negative thing, and it's actually a positive thing. It's kind of isn't it more of a net influx of workers into your community, or it's not necessarily a negative thing to be an entitlement?
Correct. It's a very positive thing.
Right.
I believe when Ian and I were looking at running the numbers, if we get Sanford to be an entitlement community, our year-over-year allocation through the CDBG distribution, which comes down from HUD, CDBG's Community Development Block Grant, we'd see around $180,000 a year.
Yeah.
It won't set the world on fire, but that can be used for a whole host of elements such as, sidewalk improvements, walkability in neighborhoods, connectivity within those neighborhoods and such, that we wouldn't have to fund through our capital program otherwise. And then we still would be allowed to compete as we currently do, like for the $300,000 CDBG grant that we have that's going into the Midtown Mall, we can still go out and compete under those categories as well, but we would just get an annual allocation. And then you can see the extreme advantage. If we were in here, we would be getting the similar distribution to Biddeford right now of 11.7 million as opposed to 2.12.
So Steve, and I'm just trying to make sure everybody understands the CDBG and how it works. So these cities get direct monies, and typically they're not competing for the monies at the state level like we have to with the remaining communities throughout Maine. So does that mean that the state of Maine might be doing a program with the since these communities as entitlement communities got so much money, do you think the state of Maine will be doing some sort of additional CDBG funding for the communities that didn't get these large sums of money for community development, COVID reasons? It seems a weird thing to give it to these entitlement communities, especially these large numbers, and not have some sort of planned program through the state like would be typical with CDBG.
I can't
You know what I'm
speculate on that. I know exactly what you're getting at, but I don't dare speculate on that.
Okay. As I've stated before, good questions. We all learn from everybody's questions and the answers that's provided. So I see this as a very positive thing. I see one hand up right now. That's Diane Connolly. Diane, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
I just have, they're not questions, they're just statements. And I'm going to start with the school budget first. $15,000 for lights. Are they LEDs? And why can't we have afternoon games, say on a Saturday, to save that kind of money? It really disturbs me, and I find it quite appalling when I hear a member of the school finance that says, we just haven't taken care of these, meaning the vehicle and equipment rolling stock. I'd like the budget committee to get a view of the rolling stock and what type of maintenance and equipment that is not being cared for. That's taxpayers' money. And to find out that it's sitting there, can't be stickered, or it's over its life, or can't even be used is unbelievable. I'd also like to say, going forward, I'd like to see some type of a maintenance agreement with these vehicles if they are allowed to be purchased. I would prefer that they lease those vehicles. On the municipal side, we have a solar project down on Route 4 called Con Edison. And it's being leased, that property. The property is owned by the Sanford Library Association. How much money is going to the libraries with that money in the future? Same with the Trails Committee, different accounts. How much money do they have in these accounts? That needs to be brought forward. Same with Parks and Rec in-kind donations. You talked about the economic growth increase. I believe it was 61%. It's like $100,000. How are they going to spend that money? Where do they come up with that kind of increase? To me, that's unacceptable. My last comment is Mr. Buck's statement a few years back when he talked about single-family residential having 61% of the burden of the taxes. Recently, I heard him say those numbers went up to, I believe, 68 or 69%. Guys, we're going the wrong way here. And my last comment is this. Do we have a paper reduction act here in town? Because the amount of supplies that I see on the expenditure list is astronomical. And maybe we can have a look-see at those kind of costs. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for serving.
Thank you for your question. Would you like a minute, City Manager Buck, to respond to those, or are you prepared?
Yes. So, Ms. Conley, the Trails Committee, we have a slide on that here later on, because you previously had asked that question. We have a slide for that in the later presentation. Also, I have a slide in there for that $100,000 under economic development. We'll be able to address that concern or question for you as well. Single-family residential was at 67% of our overall taxable base. I don't believe that I've given any number of that yet. It was decreasing because we had good industrial and the solar project valuations and such under that. I'll raise my largest concern for COVID impact as it pertains to the municipal budget right now is that single-family residential homeowner, the change in the valuation, the overall mix of who's paying what, the percentage of valuation within the community, I just got those numbers today from the assessing department, an initial look at that. I have not had the opportunity this afternoon and working on a whole host of other things here today. But as I indicated, I can bring that forward to you for a subsequent budget committee meeting. We can start looking at those changes in taxable value and be able to do some calculations based upon whatever you're going to agree on school, municipal budgets, revenues and such. And we can look at what those changes in tax bills will be given the budget plus the changes in valuation. I'll give you a different number than what we've got plugged in for valuation here later this evening when we get there. Our assessor tells me it's changing virtually daily. So they each week they put in another week's worth of data as far as the sales ratios on the various properties that are being sold here in the community. They do that right up until April 1st. April 1st is cutoff date. Whatever is built and on the ground that day, and or the market analysis, it all stops on April 1st. We're getting very close to that. So today he gave me initial numbers on that. So I'll have a stronger number as far as valuation is concerned. I have not had time to sort through that as we typically do, looking at the types of houses, the changes, single family versus multi versus, tris, quads and such into that, the overall taxable base, and looking at the dollar categories as well, like 50,000, 100, 150,000, the various levels of distribution makes a difference as well. So we can commit to having that information ready for you for the next meeting. But I'll have to leave you with that. Paper reduction, my goodness. We do the best that we absolutely can. We store virtually everything electronically here now, but there's some aspects that we're actually mandated by the state to maintain paper records. So we do go through a lot of paper here. We have a lot of vaulted storage that stores those records for the number of years that's mandated under the State Retention Act as far as the public records, because the universal storage device continues to be paper. So that's all I can offer to you at that on that one right now, Ms. Conley. So, but the other ones, we have slides on those later this evening. Oh, you asked about the solar. That's a very good question. So the Con Edison project that is on library land, I'm not aware of what the dollar figure is per acre that they negotiated on that hopefully long-term lease. Should be a very positive development for the library, and that may be one of the reasons why they only asked for the number that they received last year and the same number that they've received for the last number of years with no increase over that period of time. The significant point that I wanted to bring up in there is that we're still working with the state. We're waiting for that bill. It still hasn't been printed yet. It's supposed to be a corrective bill. So when all of those solar projects are coming in, that's a community solar project. They're giving support as far as the solar tax credit offset, whereby it makes it very attractive to purchase electricity from those particular projects. Part of that bill exempted any project under 5 megawatts. So you will note there's a number of those projects that are vying to be built here in our community that are at a nameplate of 4.99 megawatts, which would today make them tax exempt. That was in an error. The legislation that was supposed to fix that got dropped during COVID. It was part of the bill package that was not heard before the state government had to shut down in the short session. That is coming forward for correction, and I see that there is a large amount of support. In fact, one of the companies I was talking with, they know that that's going to get changed. They're anticipating that change. So the state will put forward a uniform tax code for those under 5 megawatt projects going forward. So the city will see net taxation on that. The library should see leased revenue off in that. Very positive change for both of us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I see Steve Bonatti's hand up, but hang on just a minute. If you are a member of the public, which Mr. Bonatti is in this case, please raise your hand. I'm going to scroll through the list. If I see anybody waving at me, then I will call on you next. If not, we'll go to Mr. Bernardi. Okay, Mr. Bernardi, you're on. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine is very simple. First of all, I applaud the work that the Budget Committee does. You have a very hard job to do to bring all these budgets together and make recommendations that are right for the city. And I also want to thank Steve Buck. He's been very fair in any budget that the fire department has put forward in the past to help keep our services maintained and moving forward the best way we can. For the last 2 years, and then now in this year's proposed budget, we have had our 2 additional firefighter paramedic positions cut due to the inability for the city to fund them. And so going forward, this is part of an agreement that the city made a number of years ago to help move the forces forward to better serve the city through the new programs that we have put forward to better streamline the fire department. And as most of you have heard, many of the aspects that involved, including combination of getting rid of some bad rolling stock, closing one station, moving things forward. But it always comes back to the positions that are needed. And where we have gone 2 years now, without the request being fulfilled, and we asked again this year, so this would be the 3rd year that we've been turned down. I ask that you reconsider the budgetary item where we asked for these 2 additional positions, because the workload that is being done for the people on staff is reaching a capacity that these positions are very important. And we're doing our best to help support the city. We will meet or exceed our ambulance revenue projections for this year through the COVID aspect that we've been dealing with this last year. We just got word today that any of the vaccines that we administer from the fire department, which we have been doing, they will now be doubling the amount of revenue back on those vaccines. That just came out. So whereas before we were the potential to collect $45 total for the 2 vaccines for each person vaccinated, now we have the potential to collect $80 or $40 if it's just one single vaccine. So we're doing our best to try and keep the city coffers money going forward. We know manpower is expensive. We know anytime we add positions, it puts a burden on the budget, but the workload doesn't go away. So I just wanted to bring that forward to you to further consider as the budget moves on. If the funding is available, we would love to be able to add at least 2 people, not at least, but 2 people that we have not been able to add for a while yet to help move that whole program forward that was agreed to by the council, by the city a number of years ago. And with that, I'll let other people speak.
Okay. Chief, just a quick clarification question, and I think we've been there before in previous years. Is there a reason why you need 2 and that 1 does not meet the needs? It seems to me there's a reason why you need 2 together, not just 1 this year and say 1 next year.
We've been trying to move the program. The original program was going to be for 12 positions over 6 years, and that was incremental 2 per year, and that's the way it was based on. If we go to 1 person per year, it just slows the process down of getting to the people that we need, and we're already 2 years behind our program at this point. So that's the main reason why we're not trying to be burdensome. We have put in for a SAFER grant, federal government this year. And if we were successful, we would receive, we put in for 4 people, and that would be for full coverage of their expenses for the next 3 years. The city wouldn't pay anything for the next 3 years if we're successful. The problem with that is the SAFER grant is highly competitive. We put in for it before. Nobody in the state of Maine received a SAFER grant for the last couple of years. For what reason, I don't know. Maine just seems to be a black hole when it comes to those grants. A lot of other places get them and we don't. So we're doing our best in every way we can to try and get this forward at minimal to no expense to the city, but we've been unsuccessful so far.
Okay, thank you for your information, and again, we haven't made any final decisions. We'll be doing some things like that to play out different budget scenarios later this evening. So thank you for your input. I see no hands up from the public. So I'm going to scroll through again. Members of the public, wave to me if you can't. Put your electronic hand up. And all right, so I'm not seeing any hands up from members of the public. So we can open this up to, let's see, I think probably the appropriate next step might be city councilors with their questions, as I'm choosing them ahead of the school committee, because the school committee essentially developed the budget that we're looking at here this evening. So I'm assuming they don't have questions about their own budget, but certainly have a opportunity to speak if you'd like to. But so I'd like to open it up to city councilors that are here. Two of them are on the budget committee already, but the mayor's here, and Councilor Representative Tuttle is here. So if either one of you have questions, if you would raise your hand and have an opportunity to speak. Councilor Tuttle.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I know that Stephen had mentioned the entitlement aspect of designation, and I've been collaborating with him on that, and I think it's something, and I'm hoping that we will see hopefully in the near future, because that would be very beneficial to us. As far as the budgetary things, I have a bill in that would use 100% of the lottery money for education to get us up to 55%. I'm receiving some good input and some input not so good because of where the revenues are being spent now. It's sort of like a contest of who wants what, but I think that if we're serious about what we want to do, I think that when the lottery was established in 73, 100% was sold at 100% would go to education, but that was never done. 10 years ago with the liquor revenues, we were talking about spending a great part of that. I was chair of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee going to education, but with then Governor LePage and the issues with small hospitals like Goodall, we decided to give a great part of that money to the small hospitals. But unfortunately, since then, all the small hospitals have been eaten up by the big hospitals, and what they're doing is jacking the prices up 2 and 3 times. A national phenomenon. So I think that we're going to revisit that with the committee I'm on, and I will report back, to the council and the budget committee on where we're going. That's all I'm going to say, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Tuttle. Councilor Representative Tuttle, I'll say with a smile. Does the mayor have any comments tonight? Would you like to chime in?
I do not. I look forward to the budget committee and where they come out. I think we're going to have to wait and see what the numbers look like from the Mr. Green's office. I'm really interested in when we can see that, because that's what will tell the story.
Yeah, always a wild card. That's correct. Even though it's a wild card, but everyone works as hard as they can to get those numbers as soon as they can into the calculations. There are members of the school committee that have questions. Of course, you don't just have to have questions about your budget. You can have questions about the city side also. if you would put your hands up. I don't see any questions coming from members of the school committee. Before we move on, let me just say to anybody, is there anybody that has a question? Please put your hand up. And at the same time, I will scroll through the screens here and wave at me if you have a question.
I know Councilor Hanselman wants to say something right in. No.
All right. At this point, I'm not seeing anyone with their hand up. I'm not seeing anybody waving at me with their hand up. So I'm going to move the agenda along and say that this closes the public hearing portion of the meeting. To that, I want to say thank you to everyone who participated in the public hearing. Again, we all learned from your questions, and it's very helpful to get that clarification here this evening. A lot of food for thought there for the budget committee members. And so with that, let's move on to old business in the agenda, item 10. And I believe we're going to receive some updated information from the city manager, and following that from the superintendent.
Okay, thank you. We're back to the screen on the blue slides.
Yes.
Okay. So I forgot to present this particular slide, and I think it's very important. Wrapping up on the school and municipal budgets, budget committee, city council, school department, everybody spending a lot of time in trying to define what sustainability is. So pursuant to the elements that were the 2019 referendum votes that took place for both the last tier of debt service to finish up the elementary school project and middle school projects, as well as the road bonding, the streetlight, LED streetlight conversion, council commitments towards the ramp up of the CIP for roads, as well as parks and recreation. These were the numbers that were derived. So prior to determination for sustainability was for an average of 4% per annum growth in the city and school expense budgets. That stemmed from a 13-year analysis, and the average that was taken from that. City has been at 3.72% over the last 12 cycles. As presented tonight, the city is at 3.64% on the municipal side, and the school is at 2.31%. And again, the target of sustainability is 4% and or less. On the net growth in the revenue, this is the non-property tax revenue. Again, that was determined to be, if we can maintain an average of 4% year over year. Won't hit that every year, but if you can get as close to that, and so you're averaging that year over year at the 4%. This year, the city had a revenue, non-property tax revenue of 7.08%, which sounds like an enormous number, but a larger percentage of a smaller number doesn't offset the expense side. And then the school is at 0.59% as far as EPS funding from the state. From a valuation perspective, we've determined year over year at 4.3% average per annum. That was from the long-term growth. Actually seen over the last 5 cycles, 5.55% per annum average between new valuation and change in older valuation. This year, using the $80 million, which is a very conservative number at this point in time, sets it at 4.93%. So just an examination of how we set against our sustainability targets that were previously had been determined as focal points. That was one of our, for Ronnie and I, when we were going back through our departmental request this year, our goal was to hit those targets as closely as possible. and then bring forward those elements that were taken out and ask for consideration by the Budget Committee and or the Council as to what other actions might be taken pertaining to them. Again, that ends the summary presentation. The first element that was asked for, I believe, for the follow-up was further information on the city's municipal solid waste. So at the City Council meeting on Tuesday night, we spent a lot of time talking trash, about the long-term history, about the changes year over year. So I'm going to try to do it with just this one slide of presentation. For the Budget Committee, we sent you that longer narrative, all of the backup information on that. But for the public and the members here this evening, municipal solid waste hauling contract last year was at $793,000. City Council did a review with its hauler and asked for yet another extension. There's a 5-year extension that was selected. They offered various options. They chose the 5-year piece. The new contract is $829,000, or an increase year over year of $35,899. So this all goes to building the cost that's wrapped up in your trash metering bag, your pay-as-you-throw orange bags. You see annualized cart costs. There's no cost in there. The city still desires long-term to go to an automated cart system where the trash, you have 2 containers, one for recyclable, one for municipal solid waste, is picked up by a single operator in a truck. He's driving the truck. The arm comes out, grabs the containers, tips into the appropriate bin, is compacted, and then is taken to the appropriate facilities. It makes the community, everybody's got nice, neat, compliant-looking cans out there. It would aid in the blowing of recyclables in the community on windy days and such under that. That carries about $1 million price tag to start into that program. So that cost is not being encumbered in here at this point in time, predominantly because of the inability with that particular program to keep the contamination out of your recycling waste stream. So for those communities that have those containers, they're paying a significant penalty at EcoMaine tipping for the zero sort program because of the amount of contamination in the recyclables. Therefore, the city has not implemented that type of a program. Looking at the next cost that comes in here, the tons hauled municipal solid waste, 5,821 tons. So there's no change at the tonnage year over year. And no change as far as the anticipated amount of recyclables going out year over year. Looking at the total cost that comprises this, you have a hauling increase of $35,899. Your municipal solid waste disposal cost is up by $4,160. Assuming the same number of tons, there's a $1 per ton increase on that multi-year contract now with Casella, formerly with Merck. That has a $1 per ton increase year over year. So it's at $326,000. So that's the cost of disposing of your household trash, your MSW. Recycling cost, we're actually seeing a favorable decrease of $8,887. So up until 2018, the city had a contract, a long-term contract with EcoMaine, where we were tipping our recyclables at $0 per ton. So we paid to haul them there, but whatever tonnage we hauled to EcoMaine, we paid no cost to tip that tonnage. It was then processed. EcoMaine kept any and all profits that came off from that. In 2018, the markets, well, even before 18, the markets crashed. But in 2018, when our contract was up, EcoMaine called that contract and would not renew it. So they forced us into we kept it a short-term contract. They forced us into a contract at $65 a ton, contamination fees associated with that, which we have not had to implement because we keep our contamination low, below the 5%. And then a 50% net return on recycling, net recycling profits at year end, which during that 2-year period, there has not been any profit. So we've ended up paying the $65 per ton. The two changes that are in the recycling piece is there has been a decrease in the tonnage of recycling products going. But again, we kept that contract short term because we were told 2 years ago that there was going to be a favorable response in the market Thus, we chose to keep it short-term to take advantage of that. We're able to take advantage of that this year. So those two factors you see, there's been a slight decrease in the tonnage of recycling disposable cost, and the new contract is for $95 per ton. But there's an 80% share back provision in there, and there is a minimum of a $25 anticipated per ton cost in there, which nets us out at $75 per ton as opposed to the $65, which produces a net savings to us only because there's been a reduction in the amount of tons going into the recycling as we've tightened up on what can go in the recycling and prevent the contamination. So you have total expense year over year. The new year cost is at $1,280,919, an increase of $31,172. The pay-as-you-bag revenue that you see in here last year was at $938,449. That was at a $13.50 per sleeve price. This year, pursuant to the actions by the council that's under ordinance review currently, they're proposing to increase the sleeve price from $13.50 to $14.50 per sleeve, which will increase the net revenue in here to $1,015,069, which is $76,000 higher than prior year. You take on the increased cost, you have a net decrease in taxation of $45,447. There still is a call out of $265,850 in net taxation to support the overall program of municipal curbside, MSW, and recyclable collection and disposal cost. It's viewed as being a 2-year term in here because subsequently, if you look at the next year's cost on all of these elements that are comprised in here, the year-over-year increase is anticipated to be $45,000. Therefore, you net out on that for that year, and you should be able to get 2 years out of that. Councilor Tuttle's in the meeting tonight. We've working with Councilor Tuttle with his representative hat on. We can increase our revenues by $60,000 in this line item and avoid a future sleeve increase if we get favorable legislation passed. Maine, is, to our knowledge, is the only state in the nation that charges a use tax on these trash metering bags. So we actually pay the equivalent of a sales tax. We pay 5.5% sales tax on those orange trash metering bags that the municipality use. So we order the bags through Waste Zero that produces the bags. We pay the production cost and the distribution cost on those bags before they get to a Hannaford or a Shaw's or such under that. And we also pay $60,000 worth of sales tax. So it's actually a use tax. We pay $60,000 worth of tax there. That if we could have that back and not pay tax to the state as a political subdivision, which we do not in any other area ever, we can avoid a future increase in sleeve price for at least another 2 years. And then if you get a more favorable response in the recycling market, you may avoid a sleeve price increase for years even further beyond that. So that's the explanation on why the change to the sleeve price, what the cost it incurs, and how the net revenue is produced. Any questions on that before we move on? If not, I'll move on to the next question that was asked. Sorry. And we have our airport manager, Allison Rogers. She's on the line tonight. I would ask Allison to jump in and give a description of the project. This is pertaining to one of the two $250,000 bonds that will be asked for that was within the City Council's authority to bond these two projects separately at $250,000 each. I'll let her describe the project, and then we'll show a slide as far as how the funding will be used, derived, and paid for the project. Ms. Rogers, Ms. Navia.
Good evening. Allison here can talk about these two projects for you. Presidential Lane extension with the utilities. This is an economic development program. It's to go with as an enterprise project. So we're making an investment here to be able to stimulate some development that wouldn't be able to occur otherwise. So when you look at these two pictures that are here, one shows the existing conditions along Taxiway Charlie, And then on the right-hand side, there's a concept of what it'll look like with the eventual build-out. So the problem with all of these hangars and building all of them is that there's no access for vehicles to get to them, and then also that there's no utilities whatsoever in those areas. So we're talking about water, sewer, natural gas, communications and data, electricity, and all of those things that they need to be able to get their facility put in there. So what our project will do, and we have designed and permitted this with Sebago Technic. That was done by approval of the City Council back in mid-2019. One of the other components of this too that I just didn't mention was the stormwater treatment, and that's actually at a pretty significant cost, the way that needs to be done for all the new impervious surface as part of it. So that 1,400 feet of new roadway and all of those utilities is estimated to cost about $1.3 million. We're doing a series of credit enhancement agreements to help the different owners of all of these new developments get paid back for that. So that works in concert with the TIF district. The revenues that come are infrastructure fees. So we'll be getting some of this revenue back as each one of these is developed. There will be a one-time infrastructure fee that's part of their land lease. We then have annual recurring revenue that this will generate for the airport. And those are all long-term leases. They'll all be at least 30-year leases with annual recurring revenue. There's a fuel flowage fee. So each one of these is going to have multiple aircraft inside of it. Most of them are using Jet A, and we can get 10 cents a gallon on all fuel sales. There's a percentage of gross revenue that goes along with any of them that have a business associated with them. So when you look down, for instance, at W61, that one we're working on negotiating the lease right now, and that one will have an operating rights agreement, and it'll be the only hangar on the airport. It'll be the biggest hangar on the airport, and it'll be the only one that's able to put jets inside. So when you drive by in the summertime and you see all those jets sitting out, they'll have a commercial operating right to be able to do that, and we'll get a percentage of that as revenue as well. So we have all of those things. So we can walk through, if you want to go to the next slide. So this talks about the total project cost. As I said, we're working on bidding it for going out in April. The estimate that I received from a couple of different contractors is about 1.2, 1.3 million if we were to build the entire thing completely right away. What I'm proposing to do is that we do this in phases instead, so that we're taking a little bit at a time. In 2021, what we're asking for is to do a bond for $250,000. The goal of that bond will be just to run the utilities for the immediate needs, because we have W58 under lease, and then I'm working, as I said, on the lease for W61. So we need to at least get utilities to them, because those are real projects that are happening right now. So the revenues that will come off from that, the 5-year note will be paid through the TIF district to pay back that $250,000. All the new tax revenue will come in off of these hangars once they're built. That's all going to be captured by that TIF district. There will be those infrastructure fees. So each one of those hangars will pay an infrastructure fee as they are constructed, and that will go in to offset this. And then we also have the land lease payments. The $70,000 is an estimate. Of course, I'm not sure exactly how big some of the hangars will be. So that's just a conservative estimate of that complete build out, how much that will add year over year over year, for decades to the airport's bottom line. There's that percentage of gross revenue, and then also those fuel flowage fees.
The later slide that will show you the $250,000 bond is proposed to be paid out of the airport solar tax increment financing district. We'll show you a slide on that towards the end of the presentation. And again, the reason we're selecting to bond that is the single year cash flow of that TIF district is not sufficient to pay for the project in its entirety, but it can support a 5-year debt service on that and continue to match its cash flow capabilities. Any questions on that project at this point in time? Being none, I'll move on to the next airport project as well. Allison?
Yep. So this one's kind of neat because they both tie in together. So Now we're looking at the airport infrastructure that supports those hangars being built. So when they pull their aircraft out and they want to be able to get to the runway, or they want to be able to get to the terminal building to get fuel, this is the taxiway that they'll all use. So we have a 5-year CIP plan that goes to FAA and Maine Department of Transportation. This was part of our master plan update that we were going to do this in this time frame because the pavement condition, as you can see from some of the photos, is such that the cracks are big enough that they could start to cause damage or loss of directional control to an aircraft as they're taxiing along. So this is a necessary project that we need to do as just part of overall maintenance of the airport. So we get, speaking of entitlement funding, the airport gets entitlement funding of $150,000 a year. You can bank that for up to 4 years, but that only gives you $600,000. It also means that you can't do any projects for 4 years. So I've been lobbying to receive discretionary money for this project, and we were successful in getting that. We could spend up to $2 million if we had $2 million of eligible costs. You'll see in the next slide that we don't quite get there, but it's definitely great that we were able to get that much money above and beyond what our regular entitlement was. So this taxiway was actually a third runway back in the 1940s when the Navy built this. So it used to be 0119. It was decommissioned, I believe, in the 50s or the early 60s, and became a taxiway. So it was last overlaid in the early 90s, and this pavement is really, really engineered to last. So we won't have to do another project like this for a similar amount of time, probably between 20 and 40 years. So this pavement will last a long time. It's not the kind of thing that we have to do every day. So as I said, that's our main taxiway to get from our main runway over to the services and over to those hangars. The bids are out right now, so we're going to receive those on March 30th. Of course, once we receive those, we'll have a lot more certainty with the numbers. But right now, the engineer's estimate is that $2.154 million. I apologize, part of the thing's blocking. There we go. For the expenses, we have 2 different components to this that we're requesting. One is an additional bond. This is a $250,000 bond, also to be put through the solar TIF revenues. As I said before, this has been a project that has been on the horizon for a long time. So when we were building the solar project and we were looking at the TIF district, we specifically included this square footage in that TIF district so that we could use those revenues to offset this, since it will stimulate economic development. The other component of the funding for this is $100,000 that we're asking to be raised through CIP. We may not need this full amount depending on bid prices, so we might be able to get away with a little bit less. And as I said, we'll know more March 30th when those bids are open. For revenues, that discretionary funding, there's $1.78 million that is eligible funds based on the size and the complexity of the project. For DOT, they give us 5%. And I've been working with them also to see if it's possible, because FAA was able to give us discretionary funding, that DOT might be able to give us some more discretionary funding too. So I'm showing a range right there of the 98,000 to 107, depending on if we can get that. And I'm hopeful that we could. So that would help offset and take down that $100,000 just a little bit even more. The airport and city share is the 5% plus any little components of it that FAA deems ineligible. So we're looking at about $266,000 right now if everything comes in the way the engineer's estimate looks. So as I said, we'll know more March 30th and be able to give more finite numbers on those, but that's the estimate for right now.
So in summation there could be a further reduction on the municipal budget prior to the time that the budget is wrapped up on this particular project.
Correct.
Any other questions on that? All right, I'll move on to the next slide.
Oh, Chair or Steve, it's Ann.
Yeah, I just got my video back. Go ahead, Ann.
And I'm having some connection issues as well. So, and I apologize if I could actually back up to the presidential lane slide for a second. And I almost hesitate to ask because I feel like this could be a silly question, but I'm going to ask anyway. Because it's an enterprise fund that has projected And again, I'm going back actually to the presidential lane, not the, I'm behind a question, I guess. But the enterprise fund is projecting some net revenue moving forward. Is it at all possible to repay the initial 250 use of TIF funds so that we can get those back for use, other uses under the TIF? Does that make sense to you, what I'm asking?
Well, right now, in the last slide that we have in here, relevant to this, we're going to show you the cash flow capacity of the TIF district and how that's being proposed to be used. As the new development, but that's at today's valuation. As new development comes in here, there'll be an increased revenue in there, which you can make decisions to pay that bond off earlier or reassign that to other qualified costs.
Sorry, so outside the TIF, isn't there also an enterprise fund, or was I misunderstanding that?
Guess I'm not sure what you're referring to as far as enterprise
so
funds
on the presidential lane. So on the presidential
lane, go back 2 more slides.
Yeah, thank you. So the revenue stream as part of, say, W61, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's part of an enterprise project, correct? So the revenue stays within the project, so to speak. Am I correct in thinking that? So that 70,000, for example, land lease payments.
Right. So the 250,000 that's proposed to come out of the TIF district currently, right? This will be going forward in the future on all of these. And you can correct me, Allison, on all of the hangars when they pay their connection fees, which is a portion of this $1.3 million. That will be their connection fees in total, not what we're going to be getting currently, but over a period of years. As each hangar comes in, they're going to pay a connection fee to those utilities to offset their costs.
Yes.
This 70,000 is annual reoccurring funds coming off from them.
Right, that's the piece I'm asking about. Those are going into an enterprise fund, correct? So meaning they're not going to impact general.
No, because the land lease has to go to the land lease has to go to the airport, and then the taxes from the hangar are going into the TIF, and the increased valuation from that property, which is basically the hangar, is going into.
So I guess my question.
So there is no offset to general taxation.
So my question.
We've got a little lag.
Audio.
Lag here.
Lag.
Yeah. So, Councilor Hurley, why don't you finish, and then we'll go back to Councilor.
I don't know if it would help if Anne shut off her video in order to get a better verbal stream. She just.
And I can call in.
There you go.
She's there.
I'm sorry.
No, we can hear you.
So
Anne.
my question. Thank you. My question is: can the 70,000 a year somehow be allocated to, in essence, repay the 250 initial use of TIF funds and put it back into the TIF stream to be used for other eligible TIF expenses? That question make sense?
It does. It does. I'm following you now. Yes. So for example, that $70,000 of new land lease and pursuant to an FBO agreement and land lease, that can be used to offset operating costs for the airport that you cannot use your TIF funds for. And by doing so, you could also use a portion of that. Let's say slide that over to the SRE building and or the offsetting the debt service for the $250,000, and therefore free up capital within that TIF district to utilize for other program costs outside of the district.
Thank you. That was what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, because I see what Anne's saying. It would be nice to, get your project paid for through the airport, which is an eligible cost to pay for these projects, and free up TIF monies for other projects citywide that are eligible.
Yep.
So kind of keep working the system.
Yep, and if you remember thinking back to the airport's business plan, now that we're not so dependent on, counting how many paper clips we use and how many reams of paper, because everything was always so tight, now we can focus on aeronautical development and use that. That's when I say it's an enterprise.
Yeah.
So we use that so that we start supporting the airport separately on its own, and that frees up that money to go to other different parts of the city so that we're kind of taking care of ourselves. So the solar was huge for us because it'll let us focus on that aeronautical development a little bit more so that we can start standing on our own 2 feet more and more as the years go by.
Okay.
So I still would like to see our auditors auditing the airport as an enterprise account, as it truly is, because it calls out for no net taxation currently because of the solar development and the other levels of economic development that's taking place there. It's throwing out a minimum of $100,000 outside of the district, though it's going to the marketing this year. That was a question that was asked earlier. We'll address that in that slide. And it can continue to throw out even more than that in future years as these investments, true investments, are producing a higher and higher revenue stream at the airport. The airport's a very good problem to have.
And if I can chime in just for a minute here, I mean, I think the kind of the larger concern, and I'm trying to piggyback off of Councilor Hanselman. So if I'm misrepresenting you, Ann, please jump in. Is that clearly what's happening at the airport is great. It's kind of a if I use the word boomtown for the airport. We've all felt for a number of years that for the city of Sanford, the airport was probably one of our greatest underused assets, or possibly our greatest asset all by itself. So this is something, what's happening up there is something that's well past due. What I'm seeing anyways from the TIF, and I understand I'm a little bit ahead of the curve here based on this discussion, is that the TIF revenue is being invested back into the airport. And I believe one of my concerns is to be able to have some of this revenue that comes from the solar development come back in to the broader city's needs in order to help, I guess at this point I'd say maintain a sustainable tax rate, although we're pretty darn close to that now, in my opinion, looking at the percentages. So I think that's some of the concern. Simply saying, yeah, you can have a large share of this money, but the rest of the city would like to have some too, is a real simplistic way to put that. So asking that question, you may have answered it in saying that in future years, once you become truly self-sufficient, then some of the TIF money can be broadened and used in the city proper, as I would say. But any comments on that? I mean, that's one of my concerns as I look at these numbers.
Mr. Chair, I'll show you in a subsequent slide on the accounting of the solar TIF. As of this year, the airport is fully self-sufficient, calls for no net taxation, and it is throwing out a significant sum to offset general taxation. So, but I'll show you that in a subsequent slide.
Okay. I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. This is the slide that I've been referring to. So the airport solar TIF is going to throw $500,000 this year just off the solar piece. That was pursuant to a credit enhancement agreement that stabilized the long-term taxable value on the project and the amount of taxation that's going to come off in that. That was at $10,000 per megawatt. I now know that we are the highest that I've found in the state for any solar project on a megawatt basis. The net benefit, when I look at the first 25 years, because of the other cooperative elements such as the fencing, environmental offsets, roadway improvements and such under that were also constructed as part of the solar project, we actually received over a 25-year period $18,500 net benefit per megawatt for the generation there on the airport. So I think that's quite an achievement for the negotiated project that came out of that. And I think we really set a very favorable template for others to try and match going forward on these large scale projects if they're fortunate enough to have them within their community. So the snow removal equipment building, which is the admin building at the airport, the TIF is going to support all of the $307,866 worth of debt service on that. That building was built and constructed in anticipation to be timed up with the solar project, but for 2 years, the debt service was over on the city's balance sheet. So $307,000 came off your balance sheet this year pursuant to the TIF, and we freed that up and reduced your debt service. Also, Taxiway C, there's a request for a $250,000 bond. This year's debt service, well, the next fiscal year's debt service will be $55,371. It can be supported out of the TIF district, the cash flow capabilities of that. Absent that, I would have had to have put a minimum of $350,000 in your capital improvements program. That's no longer there. $250,000 of that $350,000 came out because the airport supports its own revenue on that. Presidential Lane, that $1.3 million project, by doing that in a timed fashion, only constructing the most critical piece to those pieces that already are there for known development and not building out speculatively and sitting on that for a period of years, that $250,000 first year build can be supported through the airport TIF. Does not need to go into the capital improvements program, but it can be supported by the airport itself. $100,000 is coming out of that TIF district for marketing. That's Conley referenced that earlier. We've got a later slide on that. But the airport is putting $100,000 towards marketing initiatives as an allowable qualified cost under tax increment financing that was anticipated in the development program for that district. It's coming out for the first time this year. So there's a balance of $18,608 that we know we're going to see increased valuation this year that has not yet been accounted for. There's a minimum of $14,000 net taxation coming out of a single hangar. So this gives you a degree of magnitude what these hangars are worth to the city on net taxation. That's going to cover that $18,608. And we know we're going to have more than that will make up for that difference as far as the overall distribution of revenues. So out of that, $307,000, $100,000 a direct cost that went right off the sheet, went towards the city's reduction on the GA, as well as the ability to peel out $500,000 worth of otherwise CIP and or capital improvements, put this onto our debt service, but have the supporting revenue in order to pay for that. So all of that $500,000 has gone to offset net taxation. As that revenue continues to grow inside of that TIF district, you can pull it out for other qualified costs. For example, you can use up to 15% of the thrown revenue from that to support future bonding on public safety buildings within the municipality. You can use it for other initiatives that are wrapped up in what's called the development program for that TIF district. You can amend that development program going forward if there was some cost that you see fit to fund out of that was not anticipated at the time the development district was put in place. You can amend that along the way. No different than we've amended the footprint of the district already in order to get more revenue inside. Any other questions on this slide?
Very clear explanation, Steve. Thank you for that. Okay. I think we're ready to move on.
Right. The next piece, this is the $100,000 that Ms. Conley had asked about. It currently resides. So the City Council put forward a very definitive directive that they wanted to identify from within that economic development TIF district, which is the solar project, $100,000 to go towards this year's marketing initiative. So in the early development of the city's budget, that was put as a placeholder in the Sanford Regional Economic Growth Council budget, not knowing at that point in time when the budget was being developed if that was going to be contracted services, an employed position, combination of employed and contracted services. The City Council has now given me the directive that it is to be an employed position. It will be employed under the administrative department. Therefore, we will be doing a subsequent request to remove that from the Growth Council budget and move that over to the administrative side and have that under the control of my office directly. So that's still being formulated by the department, by the City Council. We have to write a job description for that and move that forward for the ensuing year. Any questions on that $100,000 amount? All right, there being none, I'll move forward to the next slide. This is the ramp up. So Chief Bernardi, I believe, is still with us this evening. He spoke on this some earlier, but I'd like him to speak on this ramp up some more. We've got further detail in here. There also was approximately a 6-page exceptional narrative that the chief provided to you. It is the information that the council has seen for a number of years as to why the ramp up was supported, why it was put into a collective bargaining agreement, and for all of those reasons, why it should be considered to move forward at any level that the City Council can see fit to fund this. So, Chief, is there anything else that you want to bring up? I've got this starting slide, a couple more, and then we have the cost slide after that.
Well, I can be brief. Again, as I said earlier, this was what came out of the summit in 2014 was the reorganization of the fire department, including equipment, manpower, stations, and service. And we've done a lot of things within that. Part of that banked on us to be able to increase the amount of personnel on duty on each of the shifts to fulfill the needs for the city. And so that went from having one ambulance on duty all the time to having 2 ambulances with the need to man a 3rd ambulance as well. Today's a perfect example. In fact, I'm listening to them right now. They're on about their 19th call for the day, including a major motor vehicle accident, a cardiac arrest, and half a dozen ALS transports. But that seems to be, we seem to get more and more calls on top of each other. And so we just spread too thin to be able to cover it all. But Steve, if you want to move on, I think the aspect of the rest of this included things like the stations later on and the aspect of the OSHA capabilities, keeping our manpower to where it should be to help the insurance aspect for the townspeople as well. I'm not sure what more I need to say on this right now.
Yeah, I think Steve may have left us for a moment.
I think I know on the next slide he did have the numbers as far as what it meant for the position costs.
Yeah,
and,
Steve, I can probably read them. I have them because they sent them to me early. Does everybody have that before them? Each fire paramedic, the wages are 60. Oh, there we go. He's back.
Yeah.
I can't run everything all at once.
Yeah.
So this is the fully burdened cost of implementing the 2 positions. This is assuming the worst case scenario. The benefits would include a full family package. Anytime that's not the case, but the numbers we always use when we're putting a new position in is the worst case scenario. So base wage is $63,245, health insurance, full benefits, main state retirement and such. So a total cost of $106,000 per, or $213,000 per year to implement those 2 new firefighter paramedic positions. So I just ask if you can keep that under consideration as we move forward. If the city is able to bring forward further revenues, which I believe we may be able to, and or do provide offsets with some of the American Recoveries Act fund, I would like to circle back and ask for, I'd like to express my support for further consideration of these 2 positions.
I'm sure this is going to come up in the discussion after the presentation. Mr. City Manager and Chief Bernardi.
Yeah.
It'll be part of our discussion.
Mr. Chair, I mean, just as part of it, I have always fully supported this. I don't even feel like I can make decisions until I can see what the 11 cents means when you put it against the assessment increases. That's where I'm really fearful. And that's the big piece that's missing for me this year, is that what might happen. We bought a house because of its proximity to another property for $145. It could probably sell for $225 today. That's like a $1,500 a year tax hit when you do the math, and it's kind of shocking. So it's, I'd love to see what the assessments are doing and how it's playing out before I make any further decisions. Yes, this is one of the priorities, though, I think, is to increase these paramedics if we can do it. It would be great to have the state give us money, because that would be a great way to do it, because that might stay stable if revenue sharing goes up permanently. So, anyway.
Mr. Chair, I know Mr. Clark has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Jace.
No problem. I just, because one of the things I had asked before, and I'm curious about it, is because, especially with staffing levels lower, you drop below a certain staffing level and you have to call people in on overtime. And so I was just wondering, again, if this is going to have an effect on lowering some of the overtime costs to offset some of the costs of the two new positions.
Will, and I'll ask the chief to speak on that as well. It can serve to lower your overtime cost from the perspective of the callbacks. There'd be hopefully fewer times that you're going to have a callback, especially around many times when a firefighter or a paramedic achieves an injury. We have to get that individual back to 100% before they can come back on service, because of the complexities of their work, their lifting, and the need to support their fellow staff persons. So that being said, many of their outages are longer term than they would be in other departments. That's when it becomes truly impactful, that the number per shift drops below that critical number and you're calling back on a consistent basis. Chief, if you want to comment on that further.
Yeah, so give you a little history, Mr. Clark. For about the last 3 to 4 years, off the top of my head, we have had anywhere from 2 to 5 long-term injury leaves. And these can be anything from somebody that's had to have shoulder surgery, either from an on-duty injury or from an off-duty injury, but it just keeps them out of the work pool. But as a result, that's a position that's not filled. So if they're on a shift, and we always fill one down. So if right now, if the shifts are at 11, the first person that goes out on vacation or sick, that position is not filled. But as soon as we go down to 10, we have to fill. Well, automatically having one person off on a long-term injury leave, we're filling automatically at the drop of a hat. So our overtime is rather excessive because of that sort of injury coverage type of problem that we have. So hopefully by going ahead and moving forward with the increase in personnel, it will save on overtime. So to keep us from having to fill. Right now, we pretty much fill every day. There's overtime as we work right now, because we do have 4 people out right now on long-term injury. And I can tell you right now, I know of at least 2 of those that are not coming back for a long time as well.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, hold on, Maura.
I ask a follow-up to this one.
Yeah, I just want to make sure Mr. Clark's done with his question. Do you need any Jace, you have any further questions?
Well, no, I just want to make a point that, again, when I look at that could offset some of the costs of the positions, but, that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Maura.
So, Chief Bernardi, because the contract reads that as soon as these positions are added, your fallback position changes. So if you're able to, say you're at 11, you can go back to 10. If you're at 12, you can go back to 11. Do you really foresee that much of a decrease in overtime because of that? Because you're backfilling at a higher rate.
Well, one of the other ways that I didn't mention as far as the savings in overtime is much like what the incident is that's going on right now. So when we have a serious incident where we have to use 3/4 of our workforce or whatever, if they're going to be tied up like they are right now, they just toned out for station coverage to come back to the station to cover it. Thing. So the more people that are on duty, the less we have to do that. They've already done that twice today, looking for coverage. Thing. It's kind of, I hate to say this, and I feel like I'm not doing it justice. It's without sitting there and listening to it and watch the work paradigm work every day. It's hard to explain how it works sometimes, and I'm doing a poor job in that respect. But you are correct. You know, if we always fill one down, we still have that one down situation if we have a long-term injury, but we can also change that paradigm to go back to, we can fill 2 down through an MOU if it comes into a crisis situation.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Okay, back to you, Steve.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The thing I'll add to the Chief's narrative on this is, for lack of terminology, I call it the house of cards. I mean, I see it on a daily basis. The units rolling by here and such under that, as they roll out in waves, rolling units and staff is coming back in and such under that. It's a little difficult to understand it, but what I'm trying to reference is the general public sees that the job is getting done, right? The rescues are being made, the fires are being addressed, and that's the most difficult thing to address with the public, is that knowledge of how delicate a balance that is right now. And it takes very, very little with such minimal staff before that falls apart. And the utilization of paid call individuals that used to be very prevalent within our community is all but gone at this point in time. So we've strengthened mutual aid agreements with surrounding communities. We roll on a regular basis for each other all of the time because everybody's in that same boat. You're relying on your full-time staff and less on the paid call because they're not available. They're not there.
All right. Good okay. Points, good information for all of us on the budget committee to digest.
Right. The next slide that we have is on the dispatchers. Ronnie, I'm not sure if Director Tower is in here yet.
He is, Steve.
Okay.
I'm just on the phone, Steve.
Okay. All right. So you're not able to see the slides then, Bill?
I cannot see the slide, no.
Okay, so I'm going to read through the narrative and then I'll let you lend into comments on this as we go along. So this pertains to our dispatch center. We currently have an authorized strength of 20 in there pursuant to budget. The department has within its collective bargaining agreement, as well as the departmental structure, calls out for 22 positions. So 22 dispatchers is the nominal number of dispatchers to maintain the effective PSAP capability at the SRCC. Any number short of 22 leads invariably to excessive forced over of 16-hour shifts, which can potentially lead to burnout, a spiraling increase in dispatcher dissatisfaction and or resignations, which leads to higher training costs, low morale, and less effective dispatching operations. Due to the contractual relationship we have with our partner agencies, we are in the competition for customers with other PSAPs in York County. Any perceived degradation of service puts Sanford in a defensive posture in our efforts to provide superior and therefore desirable services to each partnering agency. We provide services to 14 entities at this point in time, as well as York County Sheriff's Department, as well as the warrants for York County, as well as PSAP services for all of those communities and beyond. So it is an extremely complex and busy dispatch center. 22 allows for would allow for an additional fire desk and a supervisor off that desk able to function as a true supervisor. Currently, our supervisors cannot function accordingly. They are working supervisors. They're manning one of the dispatch desks at any point in time. They do not have any dedicated time to do QA, QC, which is a mandatory part of dispatch. We're paying overtime cost in order to achieve that. So we have dispatchers working for 12 hours a day on the day shift, allowing the supervisor to be off the desk, would be able to relieve for breaks, meals, etc. We can't even provide for that currently. So it's a very difficult situation. We have 5 dispatchers at work. It also would allow us to consider 5 dispatchers for 8-hour days, 8 hours daily, evenings 1900 to 300 hours, still allow supervisors to roam and relieve for breaks. Provides for flexibility of filling and not filling the vacant vacation positions dependent upon the administrative workload. 22 personnel takes us out of the crisis management situation we're perpetually in. I've seen the center drop down to as low as 15 qualified dispatchers and continue to function. But the strain and the burden that puts on to the remaining dispatchers is horrific. The last element in here is without the 22, we schedule 16 hours of overtime shifts weekly in order to perform EMD and EFD quality assurance, provide that feedback to each dispatcher as required by State Emergency Services Communication Bureau. This amounts to 832 hours of scheduled overtime, or just under $34,000 annually. So Director Tower, would you like to address the 22 positions versus 20?
So no, I think the write-up pretty much covers it, but as you can see, with 20, we really are wafer thin. And if I have somebody out sick, or if I have somebody on a vacation, and then I also have somebody out sick, then basically everybody's working at 16, and that's just not conducive to a their long-term health. Being a dispatcher is very hard on your health, and that's the reason why. So getting to 22 would be like night and day. It would give the dispatchers an opportunity to have an improved life outside of dispatch, because working at 16, turning around and coming back 8 hours later, working another 16, that is not conducive to a good lifestyle at all. So they've been doing this for many years, operating this way, and we just need to get to 22 so that we can have a self-sustaining dispatch center that people want to come to work at, and then we become highly competitive with both York and Biddeford, who seem to always be stealing our dispatchers.
Quick question. Quick question. I thought we were done, but a quick question is the same thing I asked the chief. You're asking for 2. Is there a reason why it has to be 2, or is there 1-in-1 work for you, not as well, but work for you, or
so the
whatever can be done?
The dispatchers are split up. They work a strange schedule. Then they work 3 days, 3 12-hour shifts, and then a 4 or 6 hour shift by contract. They're always working longer than that on their Wednesdays, just because there are more hours to fill. So if I get 1, that means one side of the week will have the extra person. The other side of the week will not.
So I'm going to take that as best scenario is
best
have
scenario
two position.
One is great, but anything I get is over the 20 is better than what I have now.
Right, I got you. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, sir.
So fully burdened cost on the dispatcher is currently $89,815. That's wages, benefits, insurances included. So total package cost on 2 dispatchers of $179,630. As an additional aside, we have a users group meeting. I think it's this coming Monday, Bill, that is wholly on the fire side of this, asking for additional level of services to be considered. That would be critical to have the 22 in there. If that is the outcome of that, I would then try to implement the other town managers as the governance board that would then put forward a request to the other communities to consider changing their funding stream to us in lieu of bringing on additional staff and offering a higher level of service than what we currently can with the 20 dispatchers. So there is future movement on that as well.
Steve, do you think this is potentially and I could probably throw fire into this as well. Do you think these are some of the costs that are potentially jump-started with COVID resources? So maybe, we would have to add maybe a little, but not the whole thing, and kind of ease into it, or because these guys have definitely been hit with COVID as a change in their environment and the work that they do, and I don't know. Is there some wiggle room there?
I believe they may be. I just don't have the definitive answer to that yet. This is the department that has kept me awake most at night, as Director Tower knows, because there's no backup.
Yeah,
there is no mutual aid that can provide for coverage of this dispatch department should it go down. So we've put extraordinary efforts in keeping COVID out of there and addressing it on an immediate basis. We've had to cover some quarantine time and some outages and such, but it hasn't taken a shift down for us yet. So this is a large recognition countywide. Everybody that has dispatch centers is scratching their head that throughout this COVID thing, fire, police, and other departments, including emergency management and public works, we all put agreements forward to cover each other during COVID should departments go down, like the Alfred Fire Department. And we were an outbreak center in our own fire department for a short period of time. We were able to cover our own, but all of that being said, this is the hole that nobody could find an ability to put forward a mutual aid agreement to cross-cover each other. So this is one of our most critical departments.
Councilor Tuttle, I'm sorry, you through, Maura?
I'm just thinking, as we look at the COVID money, you're looking at 400,000 fire and dispatch together. If maybe there'd be room, especially if assessment values are not as bad as we think, which I am worried about that, but maybe there'd be room, like if you could cover 200,000 of it and the city starts with 200,000 and then next year we finish it. And then, and I know, Chief, that you want to have further increase past that, but, maybe it's, it's a little delayed as we kind of ease into the getting that funding into our regular budget stream. And maybe there's some way of building into it this year with the help of the COVID resources. And it doesn't take that much of the COVID resources. So I don't know, just throwing it out there.
Okay. Councilor Tuttle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that in the past we had an issue of what we paid our dispatchers compared to other cities, county. I think we've done a better job, but you say we're losing people to York and Biddeford. What was the primary reason? Are they paying more? I know York must be a lot less stressful than Sanford, but I just wanted to get an answer to that, Mr. Chair.
So, Councilor Tuttle, we actually addressed that 3 years ago. We addressed it in a year mid-contract, and then made those adjustments in the current CBA that still has 1 year on that. So we came to parity with the surrounding region. We don't lose people to wages any longer. We're losing them to the workload and the stress and the complexities in there. So if they can go to another department, get the same rate of pay, have a less stressful day, shorter shifts and such, they choose to do that. And when you look at within our region, you've got ourselves, York, Biddeford, and Rochester, all in an easily commutable distance, providing multi-service services to communities. If you're trained here and you can do the job in Sanford, you can do the job anywhere.
I think, like Chief Tower said, I think that the dispatch job, I was EMT and medic for 40 years, but I think the guys at the dispatch really, what they have to go through from a stress level, I think it's really tough. And I think that would give Chief Tower credit. I remember the way it was before and we've improved, but I think getting those two positions, making it functional, should be a paramount concern to us to get that done. All I got to say, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Steve.
can I ask what the staffing level is currently at the dispatch? Because I know it's a tough place to fill. Those are tough positions to fill.
We're at 18 right now.
Thank you.
Okay, once again, back to you, City Manager.
Right. This was another question that was asked at the prior meeting, or actually two meetings ago. This goes to the donated funds to the Sanford Recreation Department / to the trails. There is a special revenue account authorized by the City Council. The account name is the Trail Development and Urban Forestry account. Has a current balance of $5,871 in there. The majority of that comes from, in 2015, it was $11,400 that came from timbering, forestry cut at the airport. Revenues were deposited into that account for the use of the trail development and maintenance, and they simply come forward to the City Council as they have a number of times making a request, and then they're able to extract those funds. This year there were donations. They were calling for donations for printing, upgrading, and printing new trail maps. There's been donations received of $1,350 in there. So hopefully that answers the question there. I would respectfully request that the committee not consider reducing the Trails Committee request by this $1,350, because those are donations that were made specifically for the production and distribution of the new maps here within the city. Any questions on that slide?
Chair, I have a question.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Councilor.
Or it may be more of a comment. Ms. Conley was asking about in-kind donations. These appear to be actual cash check donation, monetary donations. I'm not sure if there was a specific reason for the request of in-kind donations, but that wouldn't be included in these numbers in terms of donations of labor and so forth, correct?
Correct. I can tell you the in-kind donation by the Active Trails Committee members and people that utilize the city's trails is enormous. These volunteers put in an enormous amount of time, and their dedication is to be applauded. Yeah, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, back to you, Steve. Are we up? All right, here we go.
This is the last slide. So there was a question asked for the two cars. I know this is kind of small writing to look at. For the two cars in the under the land bank, two of the three cars that are in the Code Enforcement Department. We started out leasing those two Honda Fits. We had a 3-year lease on those. It was a very favorable lease obtained at the time of about $4,200 per year. This year's CIP calls out for an amount of $23,028 to purchase those two cars out. We will easily get likely another 10 years out of those cars. So a very low depreciation rate on those. They've served the department exceptionally well. They're small, they're economical, they're very functional, they're extremely good on gas. They get gassed up about 3 times a year, but they fit the tooling and everything else in there. So again, you can see the annualized cost in there, and we're proposing to buy those out as being the most economical means moving forward. Plus, we cannot find the ability to lease this type of a vehicle. They're almost impossible to find on the market unless the city was to go into an electric car, which has a much higher purchase price for us. Thus the request to purchase these two cars out.
So to me, anyways, the critical point here is possibly that the cars aren't available for purchase. I mean, I think that's one of the fundamentals here, shifting from purchasing the cars to leasing the cars. If you could purchase them, probably would, but they're not available. So a lease is your best option.
No, we're purchasing. So we've leased them for 3 years.
Maybe I got it backwards.
Yeah, we're going to purchase them out.
Right.
I mean, the best used car is the car that you know, right? We know these cars.
True.
Serviced and maintain them well, and they have served the fleet exceptionally well. We'd like to keep them and purchase them out.
Okay. All right.
That was the answer to all of the questions that we previously had.
Okay.
Bob,
right.
Did Cheryl Fournier have a question? I saw her hand up. No?
I haven't seen her hand up unless she's
All right.
waving at me.
Oh, I guess I got that one wrong, Bob.
No. But I have missed a couple of other people. Steve, that finishes you up. Superintendent, do you have something you'd like to speak to here?
Yes, for homework, we had a question, doing our best to try to estimate what our carryover would be for this fiscal year. And I want to give the credit to Cheryl Fournier. She looked hard crunching in the numbers, and we came up with an estimate of $584,479.89. Also contributing that, if you look into our budget, we already have $20,363 for carryover, where we did purchase soccer goals and middle school uniforms out of this year's budget. So that's what we've got for an estimated for this fiscal year.
And I think the follow-up question to that is, I mean, is that, because I think this is where the budget committee was headed with this. I mean, is that amount or a portion of that amount anything that you feel comfortable adding in as a revenue in your current budget proposal?
That's probably something that we could consider, yes, because that's just for this fiscal year. We also, as we pointed out at the beginning, when we were going over the balance sheet, that there was carryover that was not from our last year's fiscal budget that was not included. Okay.
And again, we don't want you to have a budget freeze on July 1 this year. So caution's the word, but you guys are the experts. Councilor Hanselman, you have a question?
So just to be really clear with the budget committee, we're looking at a possible, and that was an amazingly concise number. Cheryl, I'd never go out on a limb with such a precise number. But anyway, we were looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of a potential $1.5 million fund balance at the end by June 30 of this fiscal year, potentially.
Potentially, correct.
Thank you. I think that's an important number for everybody to have.
Okay. All right. Everyone knows it's 8:30. This was going to be a long evening, and we still have some substantial work to do, if I can continue to talk here. And so at this point, we are on number 11 in the agenda, which is new business. What I would like to do at this point, and I will say to all the budget committee members, we've been sitting back and we've been listening to all the different scenarios at this point, asking our questions, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's time for us to sort of put our thinking caps on. And what I would like to do to close the meeting out when we get to that point is have some different budget scenarios, and that's based on the discussion that we're going to have now, where as we've done in the past, those of you that have worked with me in the past, we have 2 or 3 different budget scenarios, and next week the city manager and the superintendent come back to us and say, okay, based on what you asked, here's what it would look like, and here's the impact of that, both positive and negative. Of course, if it's positive in terms of putting positions in, it's going to have a negative impact on the tax rate, et cetera. I don't want to be too simplistic here. So what I would like to do is, I guess we can start without putting anybody on the spot. We could start with whichever member of the budget committee would like to chime in. Again, thank you for your patience, but this is our turn now from here to the rest of the process. So put your hand up if you would like to speak. I think I can see everybody, so you can wave at me also, or you can put your hand up. Okay, Maura has got her hand up first, so
Yes.
go ahead.
I do not feel prepared to actually make that decision because I 11 cents is a dollar amount. There's really no understanding of what the new assessment value is new construction assessment value is versus the change in home ownership. So I don't really have a sense of how the taxpayer is being impacted. I think they both did a great job putting together budgets, but it's a decent enough increase that I really want to see how it's going to impact people, especially before I make decisions on positions that I do think are important. So thank you.
Well, we're not making decisions tonight. We're coming up with scenarios. So
I know, but I can't ask them to give me a scenario. I can't ask for a scenario until I see that other piece.
Well, are you in favor possibly? Would you like to take a look at putting the fire positions in and the other positions in?
No, not until I see the tax impact for a typical homeowner. I wouldn't put it in until I see that because I think it's potentially significant. There you go.
Okay, let me try one more time. Next week, we don't have time to say, what's the impact of putting these positions in? Go back and recalculate your numbers and come back to us. It's going to have to be done on the fly. It's going to have to be. So what I'm trying to get out there is to give the superintendent and the city manager an opportunity to play out these scenarios so they can come back to us and we can look at them. And yes, we're going to have to balance everything that you're talking about, the assessment and so on and so forth. So I'm just chairing the committee. If you guys want to come into next week's meeting blind, because again, the professionals will not have an opportunity to go back to their staff and say, fire chief or principal, what's going to be the impact of removing these positions or putting these positions in. They're going to do that this week. But if we don't give them any direction, they're going to be doing this on the fly next week. Okay, so Becky, I see you, but Jace had his hand up first.
I was going to say I'm in kind of agreement with Maura. We have them do scenarios, but we don't know that impacts. Those scenarios don't really matter.
Becky, go ahead.
I would have a very big concern about cutting anything out of the school committee's budget, knowing that they're going to have to address an awful lot of academic needs, social emotional needs. We have probably over a year to catch these kids up. I know teachers have done an excellent job this year, but our students are still behind. And we can't enter another year with our students as far behind as they are, and especially emotionally. I think that some of the money, I think there was like $8 million, you're going to have to look at counseling being put into place for some of these kids because of the situations that they've been in. And I know that because of being a principal for 10 years here in Sanford. I know what the school is facing. So don't assume we can use any of that money for COVID to offset their budget. And I am very impressed that they came in with such a low budget. And if we penalize the school and take monies away from them, knowing how low they came in, why would they ever come in with such a low budget again? Because they wouldn't trust the budget committee. They would think every time they're going to cut us more and more and more. So why would we? I just wouldn't submit a low budget. As a principal, I would say, well, they're going to cut me anyway, so I'm going to give them a high budget. So I think they were very reasonable with what they did. I also have some concerns about the fire department and how overworked they are. And I think that we forget that this has been a horrendous year for them. So I think we have to be careful in when we say we don't want to put something in. I think that the taxpayers, I know it's going to be hard, but maybe we need to put some of these things in because of what's just happened. I see the fire trucks zooming down Main Street all the time from our office. And I just keep thinking, all I can think of is what Steve Buck was saying, you know, when these guys go down, that means something else is offset. And I keep going, what else is going to be offset? And what if there's another emergency and we aren't prepared for that? So I think we need to be very careful if we are thinking about cutting. I would also have to agree with Maura that I would like to see what the impact is so that we can make sure stuff is reasonable. I think next week we could do stuff fast if I'm assuming that there is a staff on hand that could easily calculate things. You know, especially in Excel sheets, they're pretty easy to adjust. Having said that, I would not support cutting anything out of the school budget.
Thank you. And Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, kind of going off a little bit what Maura was saying is there a way city managers Buck to I think you have the ear to the ground right now with potential assessment values. I know you said 80,000 is kind of a lower projection. Can you provide maybe 2 or 3 scenarios of where you might be seeing that heading, and we can see what those impacts would be in the event that those numbers were higher? And it's in fact that might help us make a decision as to, okay, yeah, we think there's to put in or not, you know, the positions at the fire department and the dispatch we're requesting and things like that. But I think if we see those assessed values in different projections, I think that might help us make a decision.
Yeah, I can give you a quick look at that currently if you'd like to take a look at that.
Okay. Why don't we get to continue with questions? Maybe we will get to that tonight, Steve. Okay. Wes, questions? Mr. Davey?
Sure.
Yeah.
So as we're looking at coming up with our proposal and we're looking at scenarios, I agree with the overall consensus that this is probably the toughest year to look at those. And I appreciate the work that they've done on coming in with these budgets. The issue I have is that there's just so much money right now that we don't know how it can be utilized. So there's all of these government funds that are coming in, and I know that they won't be used to offset taxes. I do believe that Mr. Honig had some good points when he was talking about how we could use them to help with our current situation, because I agree this whole year has been pretty rough, and I think it's been rough on everyone, especially those who have potentially lost jobs or are seeing their wages decrease, and now they're going to see their property taxes go up or their property valuations go up. So it's tough for me to reconcile when we have these millions of dollars that are coming in without us knowing how those funds are going to be spent. So, you know, I agree that these funds shouldn't be allocated outside of what they're meant for. But I do think that we should look at what the potential impact of those funds are. So I don't know if that work has already started or if that work is months down the road. I know some of the money is 2 years away, but you know, that's what I'm curious about. If there's any way to know what the impact of those funds could potentially be.
Okay, Councilor Hanselman.
Thank you. And I really hear and appreciate what everybody is saying. And I certainly agree with a lot of what I'm hearing. I'm a huge Becky advocate for our school department. And, you know, I hear what your concerns are for sure. And social emotional learning is, you know, has to be a top priority. I agree without question. But I'll be honest, and I've said it before, we have people in our community who are just not surviving right now. It's a tough time. And I think that we have to really keep that in mind. We also have folks who are doing okay, but a huge tax hike right now from a optics standpoint, from a standpoint of what Sanford does for people in our community. I just think it's really bad timing to be thinking about that. And I hear about the cliff, and I totally get that as well. I want to remind us, as we're moving forward the next couple of weeks in our final efforts, that we have projected our highest increase in our mill rate. When we talk about sustainability, Steve, and that bonding plan, our highest hike in the mill rate was projected for this coming fiscal year and the year after. So the thing that's on my mind is if we can, to use a really overused term, right? But if we can flatten that tax curve and bring that tax hit that we projected when we committed to our roads and we committed to that infrastructure in our Parks and Rec department, and take that pain down just a couple ticks for our community members and ourselves that live here, I think that could go a really long way. And I'll be frank, I'm still looking for $1 million to come off net to taxation. I'm not sure how we get there exactly, but I think that there's a way to do it. It could be increases in revenue on the municipal side. It could be using fund balance on the school side. But I think we need to look at $1 million coming off net to taxation. And that's where I'm at.
Okay. All good comments. So let me go back to the city manager, and then, well, actually, let me go to Superintendent Nelson first. If we adjourn now, what's your comment on that? And then we come back next Thursday and try to put everything together. As the superintendent of schools.
I guess I don't understand the homework assignment.
Well, there wouldn't be a homework assignment.
Okay.
I think there was one thrown out about can some of fund balance be used to help offset net taxation?
Yeah. Those would be scenarios we could look at, yes.
Okay. City Manager.
Chair, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ann. Go ahead.
Might I propose that we look at two scenarios relative to fund balance? One being we use the entire previously audited year, the fiscal year ending 6/30, 2020 fund balance, which I think is just under 950. And another scenario where we look at using, leaving that on the books and using 500,000 of the coming year's projected fund balance. So that would just be, just to have something to look at, that would be two numbers that I would consider looking at.
Is that something we can do, Mr. Nelson?
We could, but I'd be very concerned about that, because that $500,000, we're just pushing that down the road. And with what's down the road and what's coming back, that would be, I think as we consider that idea, we could look at it, but that amount towards that, on the surface, that concerns me. We might.
Just to be clear, that was one or the other. I'm not sure if you understood that. So meaning I would look at a scenario where you would use 950 of the fund balance the previous year, or only 500,000. So meaning leave the 950 on the books and only use 500,000, just to make sure I was clear.
No, I heard you.
Oh, okay.
I understand a $500,000 using it towards our budget. That is in essence, that's going to be covering our normal operations, and that is that's a major concern. We had a budget a couple of years ago with the $600,000 carryover that we didn't make for that, and I don't want to be in positions. It's being cautious. I understand the thought process and wanting to make sure the budget is under the circumstances is favorable to all and taxpayers, but $500,000 in terms of that fund balance initially, that concerns me about the long-term impacts to that, to a school department where we've been trying to do our best to build sustainability.
Are you allowed to carry a fund balance at the school? I thought there was some state law, because you got a 950 from 2 years ago. Now you have another 500 or so. When do you have to actually make sure you're not carrying that based on state law?
Yeah, in terms of where you are, it's 3%, but under the circumstances of where things are, there's been talk of some relaxation on that in terms of looking at it. We also have, if you remember, a couple of years ago, we did come to get approval for reserve accounts, And right now, we have reserve accounts, but we don't have any money in those as well for that. So I think it's a combination of things. I mean, so yeah, I worry about that, but I don't think at a point right now, I don't think we're just trying to keep money and keep accumulating money for it.
Okay, so let me ask the same question of the city manager. No homework for next week. How comfortable are you with that?
Well, I have homework to do. So my large homework assignment is to grab the assessed database we have currently, get that categorized as I think a lot of the budget committees are asking for, budget committee members are asking for, as to what the fiscal impact is going to be on particular sizes of homes and such under that. So I believe I have that information on hand currently. We will have the tax calculation sheet will be linked up live. So any adjustments that we make, we can enter those into the tax calculation sheets, see what those new numbers look like for us and such. And I'd like to do one exercise in that for you tonight as well. And so I think we can react very quickly as far as implementing numbers, as far as what that looks like on the bottom line taxes. And I'll link everything up so that if you do this, then what does that mean on the homes? Okay, if you don't like that, if you do that, what does it mean on the homes? So, all of that will be linked together so we can look at that on the fly.
All right. Now, the other piece, and I think this goes to Moore's point, the other piece is we don't have final evaluation percentages. And the other thing that happens, as I understand things, is that we're at, you're using a 80%, 70% number at this point in projecting your raise in valuation?
Yes, 80 million, but I'd like to show you a different number that I was given today.
But
so.
let me just play this out. Now, let's just be hypothetical. That goes to 100 million. Okay, everybody's valuation goes up. Okay, and this is Maura's concern. Valuations are going to go up, and because your house is worth more, you keep the tax rate the same, but you pay more taxes because your house is worth more money. But there is an adjustment that takes place, and you spoke to this before, where the budget dollar amount is fixed by vote of the city council. I don't know, roughly what is it, $78 million. And so that the mill rate would actually decline because more money was, you can only raise, within your percentage of overlay. You can only raise that $78 million because that's what the city council voted on. So if you take in more money through valuation, then the mill rate then declines because you don't need to take in as much money. And I think that's the crucial piece. We're not going to be able to play out because those numbers just aren't going to be available. Unless we just, again, we're still going to be estimating where valuations are going to be. How far off the mark am I in that scenario?
So the appropriation as determined via this process and ultimately by the council, and then for the voters to approve on the school side of the equation, the appropriation sets the mill rate, not the other way around. The mill rate doesn't set the amount of money you raise.
Yeah.
Set your appropriation, and then your valuation calculates into determining what the mill rate will be.
So what I'm saying is that the city council ultimately sets the dollar amount to be raised in taxation based on, right now, what we're going to do is base that on the 80 million projected increase in evaluation. But if it goes up to actually 90 million or 100 million, then the actual mill rate moves down because you can only raise the $78 million.
That happened to you last year, and it happened to you dramatically the year before that. If we had, that's why we continue to put a stronger analysis predetermining what that valuation is likely to be, because 2 years ago we had capacity there that if we had known that we had had such a large increase in valuation, we would have acted differently on the budget.
So while the mill rate is important, and I'm actually a big mill rate guy, as I've made clear in the past, not necessarily a percentage guy. Even the city council is likely not going to know ultimately by the time they vote on it what eventually the mill rate's going to be, because we won't have the final evaluation numbers.
That's correct.
You'll set later on.
The appropriation shall determine the mill rate. So the city council is ultimately acting upon net taxation.
But we should have a fairly good understanding of how much is actual new construction, because there's been building permits pulled out all year. So any big projects will stick right out. And, you know, the problem is there have been such massive increases in property values in town that to see that massive increase in property value plus 11 cents, you know, you normally would take it down, the mill rate would come down. So I'm concerned that assessment change will mean that 11 cents is a massive increase for people. And that's my concern. I want to feel a better comfort level on what that 11 cents is going to do for some of the scenarios that Steve is hoping to run next week.
But it's likely we won't be at 11 cents. That's my point. It'll be less than 11 cents. Because I get a strong sense that valuations are going to come in stronger than $80 million.
Well, maybe we should be making our decision as if there were no assessment adjustments, just new construction assessments, and see what the tax rate is with that. If you're a rate guy, then just add in what you know is new construction. Don't add in anything else and see what your tax rate is. And that'll give you a pretty good idea of what your taxes would be if nothing changes in a regular house that was already built at the rate it was paying before.
So if you would allow me to, I'd like to show you numbers here.
I'll get to you in just a minute, Mr. Davey. I do see your hand up.
So you have to look at everything inclusive. So not only what the new value is versus the increased value that comes from market rate study, but you need to look at where that change in value is occurring. That's the tax shift that I continuously talk to you about and the COVID-19 impact. So looking at the top of your municipal calculation sheet, last year's booked assessment was $1,621 million. This number, you can see here, is last year's number plus $80 million. So this is the conservative number that we've been using to date. When I go forward in your tax sheet, that produces an 11 cent increase per thousand. The numbers that were given to me by the assessing department today is that conservatively, it's 114 million. Okay? 14 million of that is known new growth that they've booked year to date, but that does not encompass all of the new growth that they anticipate coming on by April 1st. It's only that amount that's been booked year to date. Okay? So under your budget committee column here, I've added in the 114 million as opposed to the 80 million, kept all of the budget numbers the same. Let me expand this for you here. Coming down to the bottom line, you see a 30 cent per thousand decrease in the mill rate to 19.86. That's with no change. Of course, your municipal commitment is still what it is projected at, 5.48%. So then we'll apply that. We'll look at the various categories of homes, a single-family residential with a homestead exemption on them, the year-over-year change in valuation, continue to apply the homestead exemption in there, and then we'll apply the new mill rate and look at the year-over-year change using those categorizations as we've done in the past. We can then, as we look at this, as you make recommendations, we can add or subtract to the various numbers that get you to the net taxation and combine that with what that would do to the mill rate, and then have that do a live update to what that does to the various housing categories. I've had all of that set up for you in the past. I'll set that up for you again. I just needed the numbers from assessment in order to be able to start setting that up for you. So that I think that's the piece that you really want to have to be able to make some of your decisions on before you move forward. So,
thank you for that, Steve. I mean, I think that's certainly encouraging news to all of us. Mr. Davey?
Yeah, so I did put my hand up before this information came out, but what I was going to say was, just to be fair to the school and the municipal side, perhaps we should talk, since we don't know what the numbers are going to be yet. Perhaps we should plan for each scenario. So are we happy with the percent of current increase? Or at what point, if things come back not looking as good as we expected with the valuation, and we look and we say, that's too much money for somebody on the average single family home, maybe we look at that scenario now and say, well, what would we expect the asked decrease to be? So that way those folks can look at their budgets and be prepared with that proposal. Or do we think that that's not feasible at this point?
Okay, thank you for that comment. I just want to say that's kind of what I was trying to get at, and I appreciate that. Councilor Hanselman?
Well, I just, I don't think that the assessed value is actually a good thing per se. That's the concerning piece to me. My focus, and I know we have to look at big picture, Steve. I get that. And everything's kind of a circular equation, right? But really it's about net to taxation. So, and I think, did I hear you say only right now 14 million is new construction, new assessment? Did I hear that right? Is that 1.4? So that's much lower than I was hoping. I got really excited about that. Maybe it was closer to, half of our new value was new assessment. So what concerns me is that when we look at our net to taxation going up and our valuation going up, although our mill rate looks lovely, we're still paying more, right? So that's the piece, and we keep saying that, said in different ways. But I guess I don't want to be focused on the mill rate. I really want to be focused on the net to taxation, which is the impact to my property tax card. What is my bill going to come in at? So I just want to say that out loud. And then, the other thing that I don't know, when I talk about a crazy number like $1 million, which feels crazy, right? I'm also thinking, and I made it simple. I said, well, maybe attack the fund balance. It can be a matter of looking at the COVID funds and saying, how do we use those? How do we use an increase in revenue, which again is tough on the municipal side because we don't have that number yet. But if I don't necessarily care where it comes from, if we want to stockpile fund balance to the limit so that helps the cliff in 3 years, like I could see where that could make sense. But then I want to know that we're using COVID money to bring our current net to taxation down. So I think there's lots of different ways to look at it. But again, that valuation just gave me a stomach ache. So I'm not excited about it. It actually feels concerning to me. And I know it's changing and shifting constantly, but I didn't see that as good news.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're able to take $1 million off your net commitment, as was indicated in the discussion tonight, you'd go from a 30-cent reduction to an 88-cent per $1,000 reduction on the mill rate. You drop down to from the current 20.16 to 19.29. So what I will do for you is once I get the impacts within the assessment database worked up, get it into a graphic form for you, as a table and a graphic form for you and whatnot. I will manipulate that to see how much it's going to take in the reduction in net taxation to offset the increased valuation. right? The shifts, if you're primarily concerned with single-family residential. I'll manipulate that. I'll be able to give you some scope of viewpoints on that. Here's what I struggle with as a municipal manager. I know everybody's talking about the impacts with COVID and such under that, but we voted in 2019 knowing that these 2 years that we're looking at right now were going to be our highest impact. All of those elements were voted in. My fear then is the fear that I still have now is those changes were voted in, but now you want to try and wipe it out of the budget in some other areas and offset that. That always impacts operations and other aspects. So, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Okay. I see you waving your hand there, Matt. Go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about getting back to the school side on the fund balance. As I mentioned, you can carry up to a fund balance up to 3%, and we're currently, with the numbers that we have, at 1.3%. But I think it's important to realize what's behind those numbers. And so for us to get that, remember, last year it was a combination of our a budget freeze, as well as students being out fully remote starting on March 13th all the way through the end of the year. This year, the lion's share of where our savings are coming from are really due to COVID, in the sense that it's around hiring in terms of our staff, in that we have people that are out due to COVID, and now we're hiring people that are not as expensive, or they have less, don't have the benefit structure that people have that way. Okay, so that's something when I talk about my reaction to worrying about using the fund balance, it's also the idea of how we got that and those costs expecting to come back. We do have some of the federal funds that we're going to have to work at to leverage those and be as creative as we can to get our students back and caught up. But I wanted to give an idea. When you look at those numbers, yes, it seems high, but if we're taking that money away, it's coming from areas that are also going to be coming right from our normal operating budget when things are somewhat normal. So I wanted to just give that clarification. I didn't do a good job with that earlier.
But Matt, you're putting it on the revenue side, and if you did even a few $100,000, you would have multiple years of using that leftover. So you'd have multiple years of like a protection, a buffer from what you're talking about. So I don't think you should use it all personally. I think you should say, is there something that is comfortable and that we could use comfortably until we get through this crisis? I mean, Ann's just mentioned there's a couple years that we'd like to try to get over the hump of the increases with the bonds and this little economic thing we're going through, especially the increase in valuations. That's a huge hit. So just think about that, because I can understand why you wouldn't want to use 1.5, but what might be a comfortable number?
Right. Well, right. Thank you, Maura, because part of it, when I start hearing 900,000 or 500,000, that's where you're getting that's where my concern's coming from.
As they say, that's real money.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay. I'm gonna try to wind things up here tonight. It's 9:00. So the final comments from Budget Committee members. How I'm going to leave it, and Superintendent Nelson just said the optimal word, creative. I get a sense that if we could put the fire and dispatch positions back in, there may be some willingness to do that. And I'm not speaking for the Budget Committee. I'm pretty much speaking for myself in the sense that I get of the group. And that may be possible. What I'm thinking is there a way for for us to say, hey, we're giving you the green light for this position or that position, if in fact you can use those reimbursement funds from COVID, create a surplus essentially in the next budget year. And you could then go ahead with some of those positions. That's what I'm talking about, creativity, okay? To look at a creative use of those funds, focusing on, and I'm talking specifically about the city, the fire positions and the dispatch positions. So in other words, we give the green light for later on. Now, understand, budget committee members, if they do that, that's going to come back next year. We're automatically going to increase the budget for next year, okay, with those positions, presumably. So we need to look at that impact also. It's not just all roses. But I think we've played this out here tonight, and again, I feel the consensus is that people want to look at that impact of the changes in valuation on taxation before they firm up any kind of feelings of how this is going to impact the school budget, how this is going to impact the city budget. Also, keep in mind in the past, if we've lowered the city side, we've also lowered the school side. And if we've increased the school side, we've also increased the city side in terms of equity and fairness. And of course, that's a debate that we can have. But we don't want to just, and I know we won't, just pick on the schools or just pick on the city to make things the way we'd like them to be. So those are kind of my marching orders to everybody, and I'll ask for final comments. I welcome your feedback. Well,
I have one thing.
Yeah.
Just to think about, the school I know has to go to referendum.
Mm-hmm.
The city, do we have? Is there ability? I don't know how the charter reads. If we have to actually finalize the budget in early May, or can we give ourselves some time to kind of hold out to see if we can get better data before we make the final? Because if we see really good data, we can add positions for the fire department and for dispatch. But if we don't, if we hold out a little bit, I'm just throwing that out as an idea. A lot of, communities that have just a city council or just a town council and no budget process actually wait until the very last second to get the best data possible before setting the tax rate. So just a thought.
So I'm hearing the question as can they be split up? And I know there's certain deadlines that the schools have in order to get that referendum done. I don't know about the city side, but can they be split up, or does it have to stay moving forward as one budget? I don't know, Steve, can you answer that?
You have to meet your original time commitments for the school side, because we have to publish that and put that out for referendum vote.
Right.
The municipal side, you have greater flexibility because that now, pursuant to the 5-year amendment to the charter, that sits wholly in the council's hands as far as the school side. So, and then you'd have flexibility up to your date of commitment, which is approximately July 1st. Because then the tax bills are generated and they go out, and once you've set your balance sheet at that point in time.
Okay, well, it's a possibility then is the answer to Moore's question, and I think that's think about that, gentlemen, superintendent, city manager. Think about that scenario, and I'm sure we'll be discussing that, possibly discussing that aspect next week. Pros and cons, might work, might not. Okay.
So if I can, Bob, I think the thing that I'd like to add here at this juncture, historically, we're always looking at a scenario whereby we would anticipate future actions going through the legislative process was going to decrease our funding.
Right.
Right. And
yes,
Matt knows that scenario as well. The EPS usually isn't set. It's usually uncertain. My revenue sharing usually is unset. It's uncertain. And the uncertainty usually is on the negative side. But we sit here tonight with more opportunities to raise additional revenues or make utilization of additional revenue. and just the uncertainty of this money that's going to fall in our lap from the federal stimulus package and how we can best utilize that. So I think we're looking at a worst case scenario as we sit today. Everything we do going from this point forward improves the scenario, not worsens it. It's an unusual situation for me to be in.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting here saying we're kind of like playing pin the tail on the donkey here. You know, we almost have our blindfolds on and we're going around, you know, trying to kind of sort this stuff out. You know, and there's also the potential for increased municipal revenue sharing coming from Augusta and so on and so forth. So there's gonna be possibly opportunities depending on where you are as a budget committee member to maybe fund those positions for the fire department and dispatch. Councilor Hanselman would like to not fund those positions. I'm not picking on you, Ann. I'm just trying to split things up to actually, you know, reduce the mill rate or the net taxation for people that are having a difficult time. So it's going to be an interesting discussion, and you know, but we need to finish up our business next Thursday. Possibly those evaluation numbers will be even higher next week than they are now at the $114 million. So, all right, I'll ask one more time. Any final comments?
Chair,
yeah.
I know everybody's tired, but I just want to say really briefly, Steve, just because you made the comment about your concern about, you know, not getting support for what we voted in 2019. And just as a sitting current council member who really advocated strongly in our community for support for both our school bond and our road bond, and it did work on the fire station land bond, I am 100% in full support of that investment we decided to make. I fully was expecting mill rate increases and indicated earlier that I knew we had an increase coming up in these next 2 years. But that was also before a pandemic hit and before huge, massive amounts of COVID money came into our community. And I just think that we need to think about how that can flow back out to some extent. So I just want to be really clear that I'm 100% behind those initiatives that I voted for and that I advocated for, and that hasn't changed. I just want to find a way to put some of these funds to best use in our community. And if you can find a way that they're revenue producing, like talk about the infrastructure piece, I think there's exciting pieces there. If we can, so anyway, I just want to say that because you made that comment, my personal stance on that. So just want to be clear, I'm not backtracking on that. I'm just saying a pandemic hit, COVID money is in our community in lots of different ways. How can we have that help out just a little bit?
Okay, so I say, gentlemen, the superintendent, city manager, you have a feel for where the budget committee is. I think creativity is the optimal word here, and I see Mr. Davey has his hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. So I know based on the schedule, if we needed to, we could add one extra meeting, correct?
Yes.
There's an extra week. Yeah.
Okay, so since we're not giving the homework, well, I know Mr. Buck has homework. I just want to be prepared for that we would be able to add that additional meeting if necessary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we would if it was needed.
Okay.
You know, and I guess, you know, to play it out, we need to get things done for the school's sake because they have dates that they need to meet. But I mean, the city side, if we decide that would work, we could extend this out even longer, potentially. And again, I understand, and I think the significance of what Steve just said needs to, we're looking at the worst case scenario so that if we were to theoretically adopt the worst case scenario, if revenues increase, valuations come in higher, or we get more municipal revenue sharing, that's only going to have a positive impact. See, it's kind of reverse thinking.
Yep.
But you see what I'm saying? If we choose the worst case scenario, things can only get better with the possible revenues that are coming in. So you can cross your fingers and say, okay, we're going with 11 cents hypothetically. I'm just speaking my mind here. I'm not staking a position out. We're going with 11 cents, but it probably won't be that high. It'll probably be lower than that, but we can't say definitively at this time. So I just want to emphasize that point in our thinking. Okay, with that, I thank you all for your time and for your input, and we'll have back at it next Thursday, and we'll see where things go. Maybe we can bring this to a conclusion. Maybe we'll need more time. Wherever the discussion and the group takes this, that's where we'll head. So
hopefully the dog won't eat my homework. Then we'll really be in trouble.
There you go.
Don't allow that to happen, Steve.
I have 2 dogs, so.
Oh, you have 2 dogs now.
I have 2 dogs, yes.
Twice as much chance then.
Yeah. So you paid for the training for one dog, and now is the one dog that you have going to train the other dog for free?
Oh, no. One dog is, I call it my wife's dog, is not trained. So
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Steve is an avid bird hunter with a dog, just in case people don't know that.
I've typed in meeting adjourned by Chairman Stackpole at
9:19.
Good night.